Here.
Ms. Belliver.
Here.
Mr. Walsh.
Here.
We have a quorum present, Mr. Chairman.
Please rise to the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, good evening, everyone. Our first item on the agenda is adoption of the fiscal year 21-22 annual capital expenditure budget. And before I turn it over to our budget chair, Mr. Barr, I want to thank him personally for all of his hard work. I think, Dave, you did a great job leading the budget committee this year. It was not an easy budget, but your years of experience from many years back all the way till today, I think, kept us in good stead. So you did a great job leading that group with Mr. Jinks and Mr. Slocum. So I want to thank all three of you for your hard work on behalf of the community. I think we ended up with a very good operating budget. I think we're going to end up with a very excellent capital budget tonight. I think it's going to do the investments that we need to make in this community. We talk about strategic investments. I think it continues to do that while watching our wallet in a very difficult time. We know the community is still hurting in a lot of ways, so we're very mindful of the impacts to our mill rate while we still continue to invest appropriately to make sure our community stays strong and prospers long into the future. So thank you, sir, for your hard work and your two members of your committee. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for item 3.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We really do appreciate your comments. The committee worked hard, but quite frankly, the whole council worked hard. We had almost 100% attendance at every one of our workshops, and that shows the depth and breadth of the dedication that the town council has on behalf of the citizens. All probed with questions, all looked into alternative ways of doing things, more efficient ways of doing things. I think we greatly have to thank the town manager. I think he and his staff, Jim Jascott, Arnett Talbot, really worked very hard, and all the department heads in coming up with answers, coming up with alternatives. The Board of Ed and Vin Massian and the superintendent were a great partner with us to come together in this plan that in the 5-year plan cuts out almost 20% of what the proposal was, but I don't think greatly hurts our spending power or what we were planning on doing. In the current year, it cuts out significant dollars as well. Goes from, I think it was 15 million down from over 17 million down to 15.8 million. So it's a significant reduction as well. And that all fits in because this is going to culminate with 31 items that are going to be 2 referendum questions only. There's no more 5, 6 questions. The deck is cleared. The deck is cleared for the next item on the agenda at 7 o'clock, which is school modernization. The deck is cleared for that to be a priority of this community while we're still investing properly in our parks, still investing in our roads, still investing in our equipment to make sure that we have a good, efficient government and provide the services that our people want. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me that comment. I'd like to move a resolution. Be it resolved that the town council approves resolution 082521-1. Be it resolved that the town council adopts the annual capital budget for fiscal year 2021-2022, items 1 through 31.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Barr, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to read all the long verbiage in here, but I will read the 31 items and summarize briefly. The first item is revaluation. We're mandated every 5 years to do that with the state. $451,000. We're going to pay cash for it because we wisely put money aside in the budget for items to not borrow and save. Vehicle and equipment replacement. This is $252,000 that also we'll be paying cash for in our capital non-recurring. Firefighting equipment and protective clothing. We're on regular replacement plan for this equipment, and we're keeping that in good, safe working order at $145,000. Tree removals. There are occasions and some that do need to be removed because they're potentially damaging. It could cause damage or in perilous condition. And we also have quite a few now with a much expanded linear trail has created some issues with more maintenance. And so we got $150,000. We put cash aside for that. Additional municipal parking. There are some municipal buildings that need some additional parking that either needs to be worked with or under our control or whatever, but we're wisely setting aside $120,000 to help with that. Technology Reserve Fund, we have a great committee that's been working with the town manager. I think, Mr. Talbot, you're still on that. And that's a committee that really has been, over the last 10 years, has really come forward and brought us into the what are we, 22nd century, this century, caught us up to date. So we're current. Various town building improvements, the little things, elevators maybe need to be replaced, or doors need to be replaced, or whatever types of things. It's a catch-all in the buildings department for items that George has a list that's 10 times this, and he culls it down to be something that we can reasonably afford and reasonably does need to be done. Partial roof replacement of the police station. It's not a new building. Our home roofs have to be replaced. This one, portion of this roof does need to be replaced. And Firehouse 3 and Town Hall, this is for portions of those as well. Emergency portable generator. While we didn't need it this past weekend, it might have been handy to have. This will allow us to have 2 working in good order and 1 standby, which I think is ideal. And for a town our size with the number of buildings that we have. Industrial Avenue Culvert Bridge. This is going to tie in with the fact that we're going to be repaving and reconstructing part of Industrial Avenue anyway, which was approved last year as part of the capital plan, and the voters approved that. And this is almost a 50% reimbursement rate from the state, from their program as well. Public Works dump truck and plow. Again, we have equipment that we're trying to keep in working order. We have 20 trucks. If they last 20 years, got to replace 1 a year, that type of a replacement. But they're not replaced unless they need to be. Miles are looked at, hours used, condition. And so they're not just replaced because, oh, well, it was time to. They're replaced because they need to be. And this is time to replace those. Public Works equipment, this is a chipper. It's going to be a larger chipper, so it's going to have quite a bit more capacity. And quite frankly, with the storms we've had in the last few years and the potential one we're going to have, it's important a town our size has this available for when we do pickups from the residents as needed. Road improvement plan, $1.7 million. This is the first of the 2 questions that'll be on the ballot, asking the voters for their opinion and approval of this, because it is up to them. And this will do about 8 miles of road in various forms of repaving or some chip seal, but repaving and others. Sidewalk improvement program, $250,000. Every time we repave a road, we have to do the sidewalks for the handicap accessibility at all the intersections and curb cuts and all. So that's to include that and minor repairs here and there. Extension of Cheshire Street sidewalks. This is the money to design it. This will design it. It'll alternate sides because part of it we don't have enough land really there between the house and the road, but it's going to design that, and they'll come back a year from now. And the second year of the plan includes construction money if we're interested in doing it at that time. Road drainage improvements, Roslyn and Farmington, $145,000 for significant drainage issues that are down there, and this should take care of that. Water Pollution Control Department generator. This is a generator that they should have in that building and don't, and this will be paid for from there. We're going to do the machinations to get that paid for out of their budget because they've got a large fund balance there. So we're not borrowing for that as such, but it's listed the possibility if we can't work that out that way. Micksville Park Pavilion indoor section, wonderful story here. And we all know generous donation from the John G. Martin Foundation and our good friend, Mr. Lohman, that we all know will cover half of this. And this is to replace a building that was so bad it had to be taken down a few years ago and is sorely missed, and a great educational facility for our recreational program that's held up there. Plus the schools can do programs at the high school, and the junior high can send people down there and do science programs and things at that wonderful facility. Development of Chapman Park South. This is the second and final question we'll be asking the voters. $7.9 million to do a significant build of the Chapman property. $7.9 million will not do the whole plan that was worked with the Wesson Company and a lot of our residents, but significantly, it will do improvements there, such as the town green. It'll do improvements such as the Great Lawn. It'll increase parking significantly. It'll add another building for lavatories and all, and take care of some of the drainage work that needs to be done, especially in the newer area where it will go. And this is something that will affect all age groups and could be used by all age groups. So it really is a catch-all for everybody to get behind in the community. And the plan is to spend $2 million of the federal ARP, American Rescue Plan, that was signed in March by the president. And so we're hoping to use significant funds to help offset some of the costs of this as well. This was a great collaborative effort where we all worked together. Park and Rec did great work on this. We are going to have the schematics of this where in the next couple weeks, I suspect later on the agenda is an item to approve money to move forward on designing. Roof replacement, Dodd, new addition, the science wing. It's not new anymore. 1996, I think we did that. And so it's about time. Roof replacement, Cheshire High School main office. That's the new main office, which is not so new either. That was 2001, I think. Loading dock, drainage, and refrigeration improvements at the high school. This is going to greatly improve the facilities there for the food service. Window replacements at the high school. They need it. The old part of the school is old, 71 and in the 60s and 50s. So that's going to slowly keep working on replacing some of those. Lavatory improvements at Doolittle, Dodd, and Cheshire High School. Various improvements to various labs. The ones that have been done are well received and are very easy to maintain and a much better situation. For the school board, district sidewalks and masonry work, various repairs at various places. You know, $100 million budget, $100,000 is not an over expenditure. It's a reasonable amount. And then non-masonry work for some restorations at $100,000 is also important. And regeneration ERV installation at the high school. Just again, the building's not new. There are things that need to be updated, need to be replaced, and work with that. And that is not on any plan to be done in the near future. So it's significant that we keep up with that. Mechanical tunnel improvements. I think we've been hearing about tunnel improvements in the tunnel for years, but it's significant to the running of that building. That's where a lot of the utilities run, and it really is important that it be kept safe, and mechanicals are up to date at that school with 1,500, 1,600 people there every day. Athletic complex improvements for the high school. Some amount to help with the stands and some other things in the fields and whatnot. And district interior door replacement to continue to replace some of the doors, make sure that they're handicap accessible, make sure that they're safe, secure, and all those important. So those are the 31 items that my motion asks us to approve as a town council for this year's capital budget.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. And the only thing I would add is that totals an appropriation of 15.8 million, roughly. Of about 14 million is to be bonded. The rest is going to be paid out of CNR. So thank you, Mr. Barry. Questions or comments from members of the council? Anything? No? The only comment I would make is I do want to just make a statement briefly about the Bartland Park South facility. I'm happy that this is part of this capital budget. I am fully supportive of this. We spent an enormous amount of time collaborating with the community on this project. I think it is a very important project for our community going forward. This piece of it is only phase one, but it does also include, in addition to what Mr. Barry said, is a lighted turf field, which I think our youth greatly need at this point. Clearly, the high school field is used a lot. I was very actively involved in getting that project off the ground and implemented. We've seen it be very successful. I think this community really needs another facility. And I think this phase one really meets the needs of a broad base of this community, not just the youth with the field, but certainly the concert venue, the great lawn, the walking trails, and all of the things that go with phase one, in my opinion, meet the needs of a broad base of this community, which is really what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the overall plan really entails a lot of what we heard from the community. So we worked really hard on this budget to make sure that we skinnied it down, as Mr. Barry says, to lay the groundwork for school modernization. I believe that's the case, but I also felt very strongly about making sure that we continue to make the strategic investments that most of you hear me talk about over and over and over again in this community. It's about making sure that we invest in places that we get really good bang for our buck. That's what it's all about these days. That's what we do with our own wallets. With our home budgets, we invest where we need to, and we tighten our belts where we can. And that's what we've done with this budget. And again, I do think it lays the great groundwork for school modernization going forward. I hope that we can get some collaboration on school modernization. We'll begin that conversation again after this meeting. But I'm really happy to see this, and will be supporting here tonight and publicly this on referendum. So I'm glad it's here. And with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 4, adoption of the 5-year capital expenditure plan for fiscal years 21, 22 through 25 and 26. Mr. Barwi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 082521-2. Be it resolved that the Town Council adopts the 5-year omnibus capital expenditure plan for fiscal years 22 through 26 in accordance with the recommendation of the Town Council Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Barwi. Second. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Barwi.
Mr. Chairman, this I alluded to earlier, so I won't expend too much time on this, but the capital budget recommendation is down significantly, about $13 million from what it came to us, helping to free up room in the capital expenditure plan over the next few years as we keep talking about school modernization. So I think we did a good job, solid work for the community.
Thank you, Mr. Barwi. Mr. Slocum, question, comment?
I guess the only thing I would add is just to really embellish it with what we were actually cutting out. We were basically directed, town managers and Board of Ed folks to really look at what we wouldn't have to spend money on over 5 years on schools, for example, things like that, or things we could just skinny out based on town equipment needs or whatever it might have been. So it was a very in-depth review, and I must credit David, you did a good job of making the suggestion for starters. And it does free up money because in any financial statement, what we show in our capital budget for 5 years is basically what we're counting on spending, whether it's approved in the ensuing years or not. So we've dragged that money out of that account, out of that portion of it, which gives us a better window looking forward with school modernization. That's all I wanted to add, just in case anyone's interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I was a little caught off guard. I was surprised that there weren't more comments on, and I know you like to go last for, as well you should, for the comments on the main budget. So I'll make a couple brief comments now. In that I also want to thank Chairman Barwi for his work on the committee. My colleague, Mr. Jinks, who is delivering a daughter to college tonight, and Mr. Slocum, who sit on the budget, the committee. My colleagues, my fellow council colleagues, that did work very collaboratively on this budget in this 5-year plan. Obviously, Town Manager Kimball, Assistant Town Manager Talbot, Finance Director Jascott, as always, Superintendent Solon, CEO Massiana, and the Board of Education for all the work that they do. This was a tough budget, which we knew it was going to be, and we are putting in place some things. I'm glad that we're still moving along the Bartlett piece of the puzzle, the former Chapman property to be known as Bartlett South. And we're also doing a great job, as our chair elucidated, that we are paving the way for school modernization, which we'll be taking up again in a little bit. But as we saw with the water pollution control plant, when we added a little over $30 million to the budget, what that spike did for us and how this council worked so hard to mitigate that spike. And we've got a bigger spike coming, hopefully, if the citizens see fit to approve school modernization. And rest assured that this council and future councils will work equally as hard to mitigate that spike. So just wanted to take the opportunity and thank all of you for the work that you did. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Yes, Ms. Nichols.
Yeah, I would like to echo Mr. Talbot's statements, and I will rely on your complete thank you to all of those people, so I won't miss anybody. So I also thank all of those that he's mentioned and everybody who worked on this. This, I was just counting as I was listening, this is the 11th budget, capital budget and operating budget that I've been part of. And I would tell you all of them are difficult because we weigh all of the things that matter to you, the taxpayers, and to us as taxpayers. And the job to decide which stays and which goes is very difficult. But I'm very proud that we have done a great job this year to anticipate what's coming down the pike from the school modernization and be very thoughtful about it without reducing your services or the things that you enjoy. And I do support the Bartland Park issue and was part of that water pollution control budget where we had to ameliorate the spike of that, and we did that successfully, and I think we can do that going forward. So again, thanks to everybody that was here. It was easier, David. You had it very well organized. Thank you very much. And it was a little bit easier to understand sometimes. So I'm glad it's over and we don't have to do it again for a while. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nichols. Yes, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to echo the thanks. I won't go through the names either, but I appreciate being on the council for my second budget go through. Was an interesting year. You guys make it easy for us to understand, and I really appreciate that we go through step by step, line by line, to make sure that we're covering everything. I do want to thank Vin and Superintendent Solon for their hard work on putting certain items in what we call the parking lot until we see where school modernization goes. And as for Bartland Park, I urge all the residents to please read up on that and see what the benefits it will bring, not only to you and your family, but to the rest of the community, and what it will do for this community. It will change the look of our town. And I think, I'm going to fully support that. And I hope that the rest of the town will see that for what it is as well. But again, thank you, Chairman Bowery, for all your hard work, and the rest of your committee. I know you spent hours and hours, and it's not just coming to these meetings. I know you spend hours during the day, and I don't know how you get paid for what you do during the day, because it's tough when you're working full-time jobs and you have to do what you do. And I appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Pavano.
Hi, this is my first capital expenditure budget, but I sat on 8 Board of Ed budgets, so this has been a real eye-opener for me. We met many times, and it was very thoughtful budget, and we tried to put some things aside, as we said, into years 4, 3, 4, whatever. But we always kept in mind the fact that we wanted to keep all of the services for the town, the taxpayers, but we also looked to the future. So I support this budget and thank Mr. Bowery and all of my council members and Jim Jascott and the town manager and Arnett and everyone who put a lot of time and effort into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pavano. Other questions or comments? Mr. Velaber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I don't want to take up too much time. I see we have a meeting with the Board of Ed, and they're already here, so I don't want to hold up too much. But I did want to thank everyone involved in this process, from the council side as well as from the staff side. As always, the staff did a great job of making this information available to us, and David and the rest of the council members. Thank you for doing a great job of, I think, creating a budget. It's difficult, but I think this is a well thought out budget, and it does a great job in still providing for the needs of this community. But I want to stress also that my support for the part of the budget regarding Bartland Park. And I think this is going to be an important addition to the town, and it provides important recreational opportunities for all spectrums within the town, from active sports to passive recreation while also providing more community space for the town and townspeople. So I look forward to voting in favor of this capital budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Velber. And I think that's everybody. I know we're a little pressed for time, but I'm just going to make one personal statement. As most of you know, this is my last budget process. I've chosen not to run for reelection. I think it's time for others to step up. But I just want to say that I am really, really proud of the 8 years that I was able to serve with a lot of great people on this town council. I served 8 years as a member, 4 years as chairman, deliberated over a lot of budgets. And I can tell you, regardless of the makeup of the council, Republican or Democrat, we all stood shoulder to shoulder making decisions that we felt were in the best interest of this community. That's what I am most proud of. That's one of the things that I wanted to do when I got involved, was to make sure that everyone had a meaningful seat, that everyone had a voice, and that we all work together to effectuate the best government that we can for the people that elected us. I believe we've done that. Have we been perfect? Of course not. Nobody is. But I walk away with my last budget very proud, knowing that I stood shoulder to shoulder with some great people on this council, on both sides of the aisle, making decisions for this community that I think show and reflect that we are a better community today than we were many years ago. We've continued to get better and better and better through the strategic investments that we've made, through the important financial decisions that we've made in tough times. We've balanced keeping mill rate flat or minimal increases while still investing in our open space and our passive and active recreational opportunities, as Mr. Velber talks. And we've had great community recognition. We're one of the best communities in the state and, quite frankly, in the country to live in. That's a fact. So a lot of good things happening with the people that sit up here in the past and today. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for affording me the opportunity again to stand shoulder to shoulder with you, helping to make tough decisions for this community. I will miss that. But I look forward to seeing the next people step up and continue to give back for this community. So thank you for allowing me a minute to say that. And with that, I'm going to call for a vote on this item number 4. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. We're going to move to item 5, approval of submission of referendum questions and authorization for explanatory text. Mr. Bowery.
Mr. Chairman, as I referenced earlier, 2 of these 31 items will become referendum questions, and by this motion that will go into effect. Be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 082521-3.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bowery. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Bowery.
Just a reminder that the 2 questions we're asking the residents to support is $1.7 million for road improvements and $7.9 million for the development of Bartlett Park South that will include up to $2 million in expected grant money.
Thank you, Mr. Bowery. Questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Slocum.
My only comment would be on this portion, which I obviously support, but I made no comment on the Bartlett Improvements Project. But I feel that I should, because initially I was supportive of the property purchase, but I honestly told my colleagues this was going to be a field that lay fallow for 10 years, in my estimation, as I thought it should. And I think because I probably said that in a loud voice to at least a handful of people, maybe more than that, I thought that you should understand that based on the process of not only developing a plan for that property, but all of the public input in support of that property, that I clearly felt that, that was a mistake. Well, I often make mistaken statements about when things may happen, but I honestly was moved by the public input that went into the process, and obviously fully support it. So I know that's a lagging comment, but I was a doubting Thomas, which I'm entitled to be. That's my job. But now convinced it's appropriate. And I think this language is just terrific.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slocum. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Okay. Seeing none. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously of those that are here. We'll move on to item 6, approval of fiscal year 2021 budget transfers. Mr. Bowery.
Mr. Chairman, be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 082521-4. Be it resolved that the Town Council approves budget transfers as presented and attached for the fiscal year 21 general operating budget.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Back to you, Mr. Barry.
Just very briefly, typical end of fiscal year, which ended June 30. There's some transfers, especially this year with COVID. You know, which account do they come out of when we initially have to pay the bills? And we're less than 0.5% of adjustments made, which is very small, and a credit to our staff, to Jim and Sean and others for keeping this in check.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Questions or comments? Seeing none, with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Those that are here. We're going to move on to 7, approval of pool subsidy increase appropriation, and there is an A and a B. Mr. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 082521-5A. That be resolved that the Town Council allocates additional $180,000 from the Recreation Department swimming pool line item account 10365-5710 to the fiscal year 21 community pool operating budget general fund subsidy.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Mr. Barry, it's a mouthful, I know.
Yeah, well, the pool is a mouthful too, but it was run very well with COVID. It was run very well considering what we were, yes. Considering, you know, the limits on the use of that facility during the time, we did find other uses for it as well, but they didn't bring in the revenue. But I think it was important. It's the investment the community has made, and it's coming out of the recreational department swimming pool. So I think we're fine on that.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Other questions or comments from members of the council? I'll say this, we know we've spent money on the pool, but I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't do it any other way. I'm happy we have the pool. I think it is an asset to this community, and I know it's cost some money to keep it going, and we've had some surprises that we wish we didn't, but I still support it. With that, I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Those that are here. On item 8, approval of funding for bulky waste collection appropriation. Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Chairman, we have 5B.
Oh,
from
my
the-
apologies. And I even
We have
referenced
to
it.
increase the
Two of
operating
them, and I
budget. I know
forgot
we're
myself. Well,
trying to go, yeah.
you can see at my age, this is the reason why I'm not running again, because my memory's not so good. Sorry, Mr. Barber.
That's
Back to
okay.
you.
Be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 082521-5B.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Mr. Slocum, back to you, Mr. Barber.
It's an increase of $5,000 in the community pool's operating budget. Essentially, we had a large expenditure for gas, the heat, and it's $5,000 change.
Questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Those that are here. Now we're on to number 8,
Yes.
approval of funding for bulky waste collection appropriation. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution Number 082521-6. Be it resolved that the Town Council accepts and appropriates $325,000 from the town's American Rescue Plan funding for a townwide bulky waste collection.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Mr. Walsh.
Well, we are bringing back the bulky trash pickup again this year, beginning the week of September 15th, I believe, somewhere around there. And I think it's going to be, I've heard from a lot of people who are looking forward to this. I do know that there are going to be 2 townwide tag sales running around that week. One is I think it's a free tag sale, and one is going to be, a selling tag sale. But I think it's a great time for people to have tag sales and get rid of things that they don't want. And hopefully some of these tag sales will lighten the load for our town, and it might bring the cost down too. So I'm very happy that we're bringing this back this year, and hopefully everybody will abide by the rules. If you not sure what you can put out there, you can go to the website and check it out. There's a lot of items that you can put out and ones that you can't, and there's limits to sizes. So I strongly suggest you go to the website and look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Questions or comments from members of the council? No? Call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Those that are here. Thank you. Move on to 9, allocation of $20,000 for design services for the Bartland Park South project. Mr. Bory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, be it resolved that the Town Council approves Resolution 082521-7. Be it resolved that the council allocates $20,000 from the capital planning account for the ongoing design and consulting services of Weston Sampson for the Bartland Park South project.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Thank you, Mr. Talbot, for the second. Mr. Barry.
Just briefly, we kind of came up with a hybrid collaboratively of the plan going forward of the park. It was a multi-phase plan, and we've not just done phase one, we've put in parts of phase two to get to the $7.9 million, which we're going to use $2 million from the federal funding. So that way it made it available, something there for everybody in the community at all age groups. But in order to do that, it had not been designed in a way that people could see it. And there's no schematic of it. And this is going to allow the funds to get moving a little bit more in the schematic to what we approved. So people will be able to see it and visualize what we're asking them.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Questions or comments from members of the council? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Those that are here, thank you. That concludes our budget portion. With that, I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Velber. Second, Mr. Slocum. All in favor? We are adjourned on that portion of our meeting. I will now like to call our joint town council and Board of Education special meeting to order. Well, it looks like about 7:10 or 7:08. Wednesday, August 25th, 2021. We will do roll call, Ms. Milton, because it does include the Board of Ed. If you can just give me a minute, I'd like obviously to invite the Board of Ed to come up and please sit in the front seats so that we can participate together. Certainly, I want to thank you all for being here. Okay, Ms. Milton, roll call, please.
Mr. Orris.
Here.
Mr. Slocum.
Here.
Mr. Burway.
Present.
Mr. Jinks. Ms. Nichols. Here. Ms. Pavano. Here. Mr. Talbot.
Here.
Mr. Velver. Here. Mr. Walsh.
Here.
Board of Education. Mr. Perugini.
Here.
Mr. Grippo.
Here.
Ms. Hallen.
Here.
Ms. Ham. Here. Ms. Harrigan. Mr. Martelli. Here. Mr. White. Is Mr. White here? No. Okay, the Board of Ed also has a forum present.
Thank you very much, Ms. Milton. And before we move on, which is our topic for discussion, which is school modernization, I want to again thank the Board of Ed members for being here tonight. This is one of our first meetings in a long while of kind of getting together and collaborating on what came out of the school modernization plan. We talked about making sure that we work together to move a plan forward that we felt would be most appropriate for the community. Tonight, hopefully, we'll have some quality dialogue and respectful dialogue about how we continue to do that. The item on the agenda for tonight, obviously, generally is school modernization. As most of you know, our last town council meeting that addressed with school modernization, we really talked about our role focusing on the fiscal impacts of the plan that's been proposed. I continue to see that as the town council's primary role here. The role I see as the Board of Ed is to determine what educationally works best. And I know that the Board of Ed was actively involved with certain members as well on the SMC when they spent their roughly 2 years working on the product that they were working on. We've had a lot of opportunity for input from not only the Board of Ed, but the town council and many members of the public through the SMC process. The board has been holding some independent meetings themselves to talk about the things that are most important to them. And the council is doing the same. But again, I see our role as really more of a fiscal authority in this case and not to dictate really what is the best plan. We've been presented a plan through the efforts of school modernization. That is the plan that we've been advancing. We've had some conversation. There has been dialogue about a secondary plan, which is the new middle school. If and when the Board of Ed determines that an alternative plan needs to be looked at because the plan that's been proposed by school modernization doesn't work, I would tell you that's when I would consider changing course. And I would certainly ask that the School Modernization Committee get re-engaged at any time that we choose to change course from the work that they've done. I believe we need to respect the work that they've done. A couple of years of people from all walks of this community spent working on this with a lot of input from so many people, including very well-paid consultants who are experts in this field. And they came up with the plan they came up with. I'm not going to argue that plan unless and until the Board of Ed tells us that educationally it doesn't work. And I don't believe we've heard that. It's my understanding through the SMC process. I see we have Mr. Neth here, who's also was chairman for a portion of the SMC process, that the Board of Ed felt that either plan that was proposed, the primary plan or the secondary plan, educationally worked. So that's what we have been moving forward with as our understanding as a town council. Again, with the premise that our role is a fiscal process, really not to dictate what the plan is, but how we roll it out in a fiscally responsible manner so that our community can afford it. So with that, we have a few items on the agenda for tonight. We have, as you know, we talked about a test fit for one of the elementary schools. I know we have a presentation for that test fit result. I certainly want to get back into some of the financial information that we were talking about last meeting. We laid out a timeline budget of the process that showed what the impacts would be to the community based on all of the financial impacts that we're seeing come down the pike, including the capital budget. And that will change a bit based on what we just adopted, because the numbers we were using prior to tonight were basically preliminary capital budget numbers, and those numbers have changed. They've come down a bit. So I think that's good news. But I want to start with a dialogue with the Board of Ed. Really to just talk about whatever you all think is important to this process, because as we've talked, transparency is really the biggest issue. And I truly believe that unless we all can get behind a plan together, this plan won't succeed. And I know that there are many people that want one plan versus another plan. I'm concerned because I think eventually we need to get behind a plan, and we all need to push it forward in some form of a collaborative way, or I don't believe the public will approve it, because I think if we have different factions pushing different plans, it's not going to be easy approval, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to tonight's dialogue. I want to give certainly Chairman Perugini an opportunity to speak to whatever he wants to speak to tonight. And then let's have a dialogue between the town council and the Board of Ed for a bit. And then I'd like to get back to the items that I talked about. So with that, Chairman Perugini, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rob, and members of the council. Thanks for having us. And I'm the IT guy at work. I should know this stuff, right? So thanks for having us this evening. I know I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to thank everyone again. I know this is not an easy process, especially the financial side of things. So I tell you, the whole board appreciates the work you're doing in that analysis, and we're looking forward to seeing more of that this evening. I'm going to do less talking tonight because we have most of the board members there, and I don't know if Dr. Solon's here. I keep turning around, but I know that the town council want to hear from Dr. Solon as well. So hopefully he shows up. He'll give some input. So, I wrote a lengthy article that the Herald published a couple weeks ago. Thankfully, they kept it at length. Those are the facts. I don't want to berate them. You heard me say this before. So the consensus on the board has been move forward with the preferred option, get the analysis done. We're open to both options, both plans. There is no bad plan between the two of them. Some board members prefer one over the other, but majority of the board seem to prefer the preferred option. Jeff would give you some input on both as well if he hasn't already. If he shows up later, he'll give you that. So it's less about what I think is the best option. We still want to know how the financial analysis is coming along. What can we afford? What can we build? My personal opinion on this is, for me, it's a toss-up between the two options. I side with Dr. Solon. There's pros and cons. There's no cons. There's only pros to both. But at the end of the day, no matter where we go, for me, it's not just phase one. It's phase 1, 2, and 3. In the long term, I don't want to be in a situation, if I'm still on this board, that we do all the work in phase one, we spend all our money, and we can't do anything else for the rest of the schools. That's going to create an inequitable situation that we want to avoid. So for me, it's more about what can we afford short term, what can we afford long term. So that being said, I'm actually going to turn it over to the board members. Let them speak and give their input in no particular order, so whoever wants to go. Go ahead.
Mr.
Grippo.
I guess I'll begin. Figure out the correct distance from the microphone here. I agree with Chairman Perugini that the both plans are agreeable from an educational point of view. As the Superintendent Solon has discussed, that the programs for the sixth grade, one might be slightly easier than the other to have those students learn in a different way than they are now. But overall, my main concern, of course, is the long-term totality of the plan, and how we can, as a community, afford the best way forward. And so for me, it's about, not doing too much too soon, but doing enough to bring the plan forward in its totality. Right now, it appears that the preferred option would be that the correct path forward, because I know that there's a significant debt difference between the two plans. And so, so from my point of view, that sound financial ground is very important to the totality of the plan, because as we know, every building, most of us went on the tours of those buildings. We know that all of the buildings need some renovation or total renovation. And so it's important that over the course of not 10 years, but the next 20 years, really a generational project, that our school system be upgraded in its facilities to bring it into the into the 21st century, even though by then it'll be the mid 21st century, believe it or not. And so that's my main concern. And my secondary concern, of course, is land use. We've identified certain parcels of land right now, and for me, some of the concern, of course, is that the preferred plan right now is based on these population projections that we had, which was, I guess, maybe a little bit of a surprise in the beginning of this whole thing a year and a half ago. And if those shift one way or the other, I think that we need to have flexibility in how we go forward. There's particular land that's been identified in this plan that if we overuse or underutilize, I think that when we finally, put our final sketches together, that we make sure that everything is being used as efficiently as possible. So I'll end right there for now.
So if you don't mind,
Sure.
Mr. Grippo, I'm just going to jump in quickly on that, because I think you raise a good point. You may be talking about maximizing the usability of the parcel out on Marion
Yes,
and
exactly.
Jarvis.
Yeah.
Obviously, we want to make sure that we're maximizing the usability of all the parcels. What we don't want to do is underbuild and then find out that we had a need for a parcel that we've already used, and we can't maximize the usability because of it. One of the things that I guess maybe it's a question, you guys may know more about this. The way I see it, the enrollment, I mean, this really is driven by enrollment. I think the state of Connecticut is really going to be, from what I know, my layman perspective, the state of Connecticut is really also going to be focused on that. And I think both plans do address enrollment. I think the two elementary schools address it better. And my question really is that it looks like the middle school, if it stays 7 and 8, in the high school, we don't hit projections that would maximize those buildings. Those buildings have capacity really way out into the foreseeable future. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Yes, and I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I don't know, Chuck, if you remember what the maximum enrollment projection was from SLR, and if we would be near the max at any point in time in the foreseeable future with that. I don't think we were going to over it. I'll check, but I believe that statement is correct. But no, we were not in a situation where again, the projections were pretty detailed. There's no situation where existing DOD would be over-enrolled in the foreseeable future. Now, could that change in the future? Possibly. If Cheshire is the place to be and continues the place to be, we may see more folks moving in, but we took that into consideration that was not going to be an issue in either plan. So unless the projections change, DOD is still safe for enrollment.
So if in fact that's the case, I guess the concern would be if we went ahead under the plan that's proposed and we did an elementary school, let's say the north end one is on that parcel, and then you have a problem with the middle school and you need to build a new middle school, where do you go with the construction of that new middle school? Is that the concern, Mr. Grippo?
Yes, it is.
Okay. But again, it doesn't look like there's any real enrollment projection concerns anytime way down the road that I see in this analysis relative to the middle school or the high school. Quite frankly, I think they have an enormous amount of extra space. Chuck or anybody? I'm just trying to create a dialogue here. So we'll get to comments from everybody, but I think it's important as we have questions on topics, we might as well just hash them out and have some dialogue. And I think it's important for the public to kind of understand what we're all thinking. So. Yeah, if you don't mind, it just because we're, along the lines of, they raise a very good question about making sure that we don't pigeonhole ourselves relative to the development of that north end piece where we may need it for a larger building down the road. So I'm just trying to get some legs to that.
Yeah, so the study from SLR, who did the enrollment projection, can everybody hear me okay? From last October for DOD, they range from the their projection for 2021, it's 633 that dipped down to about 586 for a low in 21-22. So this upcoming year is what they're projecting. And the peak is out to 2930. With a projected enrollment for grade 7-8 of 789 students. The capacity of the school is 906. So there's about, at the highest peak, a little over maybe 120 student availability in your. So there is room in DOD. The high school is a little bit more. The low in 25-26 is 1,138 students. 2930 is about 1,262, and their capacity is estimated at 1,666. So there is capacity in a high school as well.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, Mr. Slocum.
Yeah, to that point, Chuck, with an enrollment capacity of 980, whatever you said, with a modified DOD, renovated DOD going down the road, presuming that classroom structure and design may change within that building, does that change the capacity of that building? Does that reduce it with a renovation down to a lower number, closer to projection?
I think it would really depends on the ed specs at that time and what the programming, the educational programming is. They estimated the capacity based upon the existing general classrooms that are in DOD now as it exists. So if you were to reprogram that space, and there's a lot of variations if at architect like.
Well, I only ask because presuming that a middle school renovation with 2 grades is potentially to be done, and the assumption is that it's going to be on the same site. Are there capacity changes? Simply because I think they currently build these middle schools with different sort of classroom arrangements, room use arrangements.
Generally, we program to maintain that capacity. I think.
If I could chime in, Tim, so I would not suggest, and I don't think you're suggesting this, but if, for the next 5-10 years, if enrollment looks to be under what the building can handle, when we get to that point of renovating DOD, I wouldn't recommend reducing the capacity. Keep it there. But, I know Dr. Stone will probably chime in on this too.
And
at some
what I
point.
meant by that was not reducing the capacity, but does the changes that might take place in the facility change the capacity?
It can, but keep in mind, we're trying to stay under a certain,
Right.
a state limit too on that enrollment. But what I was going to go with this is, if you look in the plan and some of the site visits, and I know I said I wasn't going to talk too much, but it's the Italian in me, but the space needs to be more configurable, more storage space, more room for configurable classrooms. for special needs students, configurable desks, that kind of, so if capacity might be the same, but if we can't build out on that environment, then because it's a small piece of property, you're probably gonna end up building up. So you may add more lab spaces, other spaces for group work, things like that. It may not have the capacity, but we'll cross that bridge hopefully when we start talking about what to do with that.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Yeah, Mr. Barber, sure.
Yeah, related to capacity, and I do have a question and a concern. I'm not as worried about that, 100 students, either way. I mean, that's not a big number percentage-wise, and it's not something that we should change a whole plan for. I am concerned, and I have voiced this since the beginning of the process, of the perceived excess capacity at the high school. 1,166 kids, and it's for 1,600 kids. But I am aware of the fact that the teaching is changing to some degrees. The classroom occupancy is not as much as it had been. So I would appreciate a subsequent meeting if we would know what the real excess capacity is. And bear with me for a moment, I'm going to give you some history. The whole reason we have Darcy School as a kindergarten center is we had those 12 extra classrooms, and the citizens through their town council weren't going to do anything about any additional spaces, which we did to the elementary schools in the 90s. We weren't going to do that until we knew what was going to happen with that space. I would venture that there is an element of the community that remembers that. And there's an element of the community that wants to make sure we're not building new spaces when we may have excess capacity. Now, I know they aren't necessarily in the right age groups. And the reason I'm asking that is that it could fit in that the administration could move there possibly. It is in other towns, Torrington, Wallingford, other places. May not be ideal, but I would not want to see us have significant excess capacity there and not do anything about it, yet build other new buildings that may or may not have added space for administration. So that's a factor that I'd like to see discussed and brought to a conclusion before we finalize a plan. Thank you. It was
Thank you.
apropos to what was.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Mr. Barber. Yes. So, Mr. Grippo, thank you for your comments. And other members of the Board of Ed? Sure, Mr. Martelli.
Sure. Good evening. So coming into this, I was a new Cheshire High School guy. I thought that the charge from the town council was, to look at all the school buildings and kind of go through them methodically. And I was fully on board with building a new high school. And you never really hear that people move to a town because there's a really nice middle school. You hear more that you choose a community based on the high school and the facilities that the building hosts. Fast forward to the enrollment study that came out, and our immediate need, and I still believe this today, is our immediate need is in the lower elementary school level. There's a huge surge of kids coming. That's real. I want to believe it's real. We've hired great consultants to tell us that. Just driving around the community, you can see new construction going up. There's additional proposals in the north end of town, which will be coming online. I do believe that the best plan is for the two new elementary schools. I think that we have to do something, and I wanted to say that I think that's the right thing to do today. If somebody was to tell me that we only have one shot at doing one thing over the next 20 years, I would say that we should probably look at a middle school as a central facility for the community in order to have a new auditorium and additional athletic fields, et cetera. But I don't believe that's where we're going. I think that if we're going to move forward with a project, a referendum shortly, I think it should increase in students. Also to the Marion Road parcel, I've thought about that. It's right down the street from my house several times. I don't want to use that property if it's not going to be utilized to the best of its ability. I know that Councilman Walsh has talked about, with Hummiston School also online and creating kind of a campus over there with the elementary school and moving some of the other programs there. So I think that we could really use that property within the first phase of the development of the schools to deal with the immediate enrollment issues. But yeah, the whole process has been really eye-opening. There hasn't been the project that I say oh my God, at night, this is the project that we have to go forward with. So I think that the dialogue between the town council and the Board of Education is extremely important because we all know something needs to be done. And so just figuring out what that best first step is in order to get everybody in the community behind it. And so in April, when it goes to referendum, hopefully if it does go in April, that we get we get support from the entire community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martelli. And I think you raise a good point, but I've talked about it and others here about Hummiston. I believe and others up here believe, and I'm not sure how you all feel, that Humiston should be included in phase one. I think we've got a lot of ADA issues. One of the things that drives me is making sure we can check off as many ADA issues as we can in this first phase. So I would like to add into this plan, trying to determine what we can do with Humiston in phase one. And so, it's going to take a bit more money to do that. I think this elementary plan, is a bit more affordable. I know there's some differences of opinion, but the facts are, in order to do it at middle school, I think you'd probably have to do something with Chapman as well. And the combination of those two, in my opinion, based on just looking at the numbers, not my opinion, and in the experts' opinion, it's more costly. And at the end of the day, you're right, Mr. Martelli, we really need to do a plan that works from beginning to end. This isn't hopefully just going to be phase one. But nonetheless, we have to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? And so, we need to get behind something that works, that meets the needs of the community currently, which I agree with you. I think the elementary school clearly on the numbers suggests that we've got an issue coming there. And I think the state of Connecticut has said it pretty clear. I know there are those that want to push for a middle school, but I hear from the state of Connecticut that the meeting that many of you were at, that really isn't an option that they're thrilled about because it's just too big of a school. Now, they said maybe they can be convinced if there's enough support from the community or otherwise. That's fine. I'm not suggesting they wouldn't ever support it, but their first look at this was driven by the numbers and the problem in the elementary level, which is exactly what you just said. So, I think we have to meet those needs first. So I appreciate your comments, Andrew. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this kind of dovetails, and I apologize to the three other members of the Board of Education that I'm going to bring this up before you guys get a chance to speak. But you closed out the first meeting, Mr. Chair, by talking about fuzzy memory. And if it happens to a young guy like you, you can imagine what it's like for an old guy like me. So I
You're
went
a lot
back.
sharper than me, Mr. Talbot. I can give you that. I've been on this council a long time with you, my friend.
I went back to the minutes of the last SMC meeting, and I just want to put some things into perspective and bring up a point that we haven't addressed yet. And I appreciate everyone's indulgence for a couple minutes. So at the meeting on March 17th, which was the final SMC meeting, there was a motion by Ms. O'Donnell, seconded by Mr. Walsh, moved that the School Modernization Committee eliminate scenario 2A from consideration based on the information from OSCGNR in the size of the middle school. So in the comments that were done, and very similar to what Mr. Perugini said tonight, Board of Ed Chairman Perugini said neither plan is bad, 2A or 6, and both have great options. There's lots of analysis to make these plans work. He is opposed to removing scenario 2A now. Mr. Martelli, along the same line, agreed with comments made by Mr. Perugini and said later on, both options are on the table for review. Ms. Nichols from the council supports keeping both scenarios. And then her closing comments were what I want to focus on. As an at-large counselor, Ms. Nichols explained the town is her constituency, and she needs to hear from constituents on what they want and what they can afford. She is in favor of keeping both scenarios. So the motion to eliminate the middle school, the 6 to 8 middle school, failed on a vote of 8 to 4. It failed. So then the final motion that passed was worded this way. It was a motion by Mr. Walsh, seconded by Ms. O'Donnell, moved that the School Modernization Committee select scenario number 6 as the first recommendation to the town council, with scenario number 2A as the second scenario. So I guess where I'm going with all this is I've made it pretty clear, and it's been it's been clear that I support the middle school option. What we're missing is the piece that Ms. Nichols talked about. We haven't heard from the public. I know that all three of the Board of Ed members that have spoken so far have said neither scenario is a bad scenario. We've talked about we need a scenario that can get the support of our residents and that can pass. We're starting to look at, and we've gone through some of the process of getting numbers to look at both scenarios. And we're going to have an idea if we plug in the ultimate scenario that we choose, what the numbers are going to be like immediately 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and so on. So I think to me is the piece that Ms. Nichols talked about at that meeting. We have not heard from the public and we've not done anything to get the public's input on which scenario that we should be backing. I can tell you anecdotally that the public that I've heard from supports a 6 to 8 middle school. I haven't heard a groundswell of support for 2 elementary schools. In fact, I've heard people talk against it. So again, I apologize to the Board of Ed members that did not get a chance to speak, but I thought it dovetailed off of what had been said and some of the dialogue we've had so far. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Ms. Talbot. Ms. Nichols?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Talbot. I did say all of those things that you said, but in retrospect and in further information and discussion with the state, it became fairly clear to me that the state would not be as supportive of the option of the middle school. I am not opposed to the concept of a 6 through 8 middle school. I think it's a possibility. But when I look at it now in context with other things that have come forward, and I will have to respectfully disagree because I was at the elementary school information sessions where the parents were at each of Norton School and what was the other one that we went to, Chapman School, who were in favor of those things. So I think you're right. I was at the Dodd meeting, and that meeting was attended by Dodd parents, and they were in favor of fixing Dodd. If I were a Dodd parent, I probably would have spoken in favor of that. If I were at Norton School, I might have supported Norton School. So I'm not sure, and I think we absolutely must hear from the public what they want. But I also think that once we've heard those things, it is up to us and the Board of Education to make the tough decisions that are dictated by both the finances and the state's response to how it's going to be funded. So when the 2 proposals came before the council and the Board of Education, I believe, and I could be wrong because I'm older than both of you, so if you have trouble, there are times, but I think the final recommendation was a 9-2 or 3 recommendation that the preferred plan be the one that we recommended, and I voted that way. So I agree that there is some merit for a 6 to 8 program. I'm not disputing that at all, but I think that it boils down to the best place to get the best result for the most kids. A 6 through 8 middle school doesn't do anything for Chapman School, which has ADA issues, for the other schools that are going to meet their capacity much quicker than the completion of Dodd, so that we can do that. And so as I go through the process, I am at the point where I am in favor of the preferred option that we gave you to begin with. So that's where I come. Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we had our first meeting and we were talking about this, there seems to be a little bit of confusion about and it may be semantics about the the 6 to 8 middle school proposal and that the state wouldn't fund it or wouldn't support it. When we had our first meeting, I asked Mr. Warrington very directly, and I'll do so again tonight. Did the state of Connecticut give you a flat no as to that they would not fund a 6 to 8 middle school? I know that they were lukewarm on it, but was it a no?
It wasn't a flat no. They felt the size, which would be approximately 1,200 students, was larger than they would like to see for a middle school option.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Absolutely,
Chairman
Mr.
Norris,
Talbot.
if I may, Faith's
Yeah,
been trying
yes.
to raise her hand in
Yes,
all this. so I just wanna-
absolutely. Yes, Ms. Ham.
Thank you.
I'm fine. I mean, the dialogue is great and I don't want to interrupt. Under the heading of water under the bridge, I do wish that survey that we had conducted had asked the basic question of what the community wanted: new middle school, new high school, new elementary schools. That would have probably provided us some guidance. And I'm not averse to going back to doing another survey to see which of the two options is preferred, but it's unfortunate that we have to do that. But anyway, I'm going to just speak to a couple of things. We had 3 meetings this summer to talk about these options and to bring them to the community. We have more meetings or more people tonight, including board and council members, than we had in all of those meetings, which is really kind of discouraging when we're all there waiting for, I was looking for big crowds because I thought this was an important issue. I know it was summer, but I don't know that what we heard was a representative sample of the town. So I asked the town, get vocal if you have options on either, or opinions on either side. We've heard from our superintendent, I'm going to speak to the academics a little bit, that there's no material difference in the outcomes of the instruction or the performance of kids in a K-6 versus a 6-8. Our students are performing very, very well with our current configuration. We have seen dramatic increases in test scores for our K through 8 population. So I have to ask, do we really risk losing our gains by not adopting the 6-8 situation? I know you can't prove a negative, and it would be really hard for those who are advocating the 6-8 situation or scenarios to say, we know we're going to perform better, but we do have other schools in our DERG who are a 6-8 model, and they're performing more poorly than we are. So does it make sense? Are we going to see any kind of gain to justify disrupting the program we have now? And I just think that's something that we all have to consider. I do want to see more flexibility in the schools. Mr. Jenks, when he presented his plans, did point out, and it is true, we are going to hit we're going to get closer to our capacity level with the 2 middle schools. In neither case do we hit them. But I just would like to see these new schools adaptable so that we don't run out of capacity too quickly. So I think finally, we asked the SMC to give us options, and to give us options, as I recall, a couple of options, but to make a choice. And sometimes groups have to lead, and they led. And I respect the hours and hours and hours of input that they gave and dedication. And they know more than I. And if they came to this decision, I am willing to support them on that. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Ham. Mr. Slocum?
Well,
Yes.
if you want to give it to a Board of Ed. please
Yeah,
do
yeah,
that.
well, either or. Ms. Allen?
So let me move the mic. So I have been on the board for, almost 8 years. And like Mr. Orris, I am not running for reelection.
Come closer.
Yeah, so here, let me bring it closer. Okay, is that okay? I was on the board for the facilities master plan that was developed a few years ago, as was Ms. Pavano. And the phase one of that plan was recommended to be a 6 through 8 middle school. I have never wavered in my view that the 6 to 8 middle school is, in my view, the best first step for the town, because it does address enrollment crunches at the elementary schools, and it benefits the entire, the whole town. Students in 6 through 8, all of them would be in a brand new school and would be, I think, educationally, my view is that it's a better educational experience for 6th graders to be in the middle school. The curriculum is set up to be 6 through 8 nowadays, and there are other opportunities that our 6th graders would be given that they can't get in elementary schools. Either more world languages, maybe more science and, sorry, I'm echoing. And so, the teachers that were surveyed, the 6th through 8th grade teachers who were surveyed by an enormous majority, I think it was 85 or 90%, were in favor of a 6th through 8 middle school. Now, educationally, maybe we're not talking about a huge difference between, if we move the 6th graders to a middle school environment. I don't know. I mean, they'll still do great. But it's not so much that I think that that middle school is going to change the level of our performance specifically, but it does give these kids a much broader educational opportunity at that in the 6th grade. And Superintendent Solon and Assistant Superintendent Marlene Solano, I think at one point did present to the SMC what they viewed as being the benefits of a 6th through 8 middle school and advocating for that. Not that it's, the other plan is also fine. I don't think it's as good as the middle school. And yes, I understand that Chapman would also have to be addressed in that phase. It's going to cost a little bit more money. But if we're talking about, we all want a long-term plan that addresses all of the schools and takes care of everything, we are going to be spending a lot of money over the course of 20 or 30 years. My concern is and has been that if you look at how long it has taken us to get to this point, and that maybe we'll be putting something out for referendum in April, I think it's unrealistic to believe that the next phase is going to be approved anytime soon. We are talking about what can we do, in my view, what can we do today, might be a little more expensive, but that's going to get the biggest bang for our buck. One of the objections I had to the way that the SMC presented their findings was, I never believed that there should be a preferred option and a less preferred option. As soon as that came out and as soon as that was articulated, now you've already biased the view of, what is the right choice and the not so right choice. And I believe that we should have had both options come to the town council and the board on equal footing, and then, figured it out from there. But every time I hear people saying, well, the preferred option is this, and I have to respect the preferred option, I just find that somewhat counterproductive, because I think the community, you have people on all sides on this. And yes, we do need to hear from the community, but they're hearing a message every time people say the preferred option. They're hearing, that's changing the way they think about things without requiring them to really give full consideration to both plans. I will support what the majority of the board decides. I might not be enthusiastic if it's the 2 middle schools, but I'm not going to, vote against that either. But I do want everyone on the town council, everyone in the community to really think about the middle school option as being something that I think could benefit us as a town and certainly for our kids. So I'll stop now. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Ms. Howland. Other members of the board or Mr. Slocum?
Yeah. I guess I'm going to be most informed, and I believe I have been informed greatly by sort of the numbers and projections, and I think that's how the SMC was sort of motivated. I mean, expectations were perhaps with the high school, as Mr. Martelli mentioned, others with the middle school, but there was some, I believe, enlightenment to the whole group to be able to come up with a vote like that. And I, on the town council, one of 9, of course, think it's a huge expense for the community, and yet we recognize it's the most important investment. So that's not the only reason you put something forth, but one that can address number one, the fact that you can shutter some facilities and take them offline sooner rather than later, I think is critically important to us. We cleared $14 million out of the capital budget 5-year plan as a result of that. In other words, my decision is always made based on information. Now, does that mean SLR is the holy grail with projections? I'm assuming that they're correct or hoping that they're correct. And as an outcome, addressing how the solution goes forward to the voter. So I'm assuming, I'm taking, not for granted, but I'm taking out of the study that if we can get the voters to accept the importance to the community over time with just expense, with less buildings, some demolished off the record, possibly saleable real estate where Chapman sat. And then the other thing, which has nothing to do with any of the study, is that Cheshire kids, including me, went to a 1 through 6th grade school. And I certainly knew when I was in 3rd grade, I never encountered a 5th or 6th grader. I went to Norton. It's kind of designed so that doesn't really happen, maybe in the cafeteria. But the bottom line is we have a community that is not going to be strained by the understanding of a few new, K through 6th grade schools. I mean, they know the product, and I know the outcomes in Cheshire are extraordinary. So I believe our teaching staff, regardless of institution they're setting in, are presenting the best possible programs to our kids. So I know you guys are in charge of programming, and I respect that. I'm just speaking about my experience. And oh, by the way, in the interest of full disclosure, I didn't go to 6th grade at Norton. I went to St. Bridget's. But the bottom line is, I remember, there's growth in the age groups as they go forward, and schools have to handle that. I think our community is accepting of a K through 6 because they're used to it. They see no harm. And at the same time, from my perspective, 2 new elementary schools are addressing a long-term need. I mean, it's not a short-term need. And we're utilizing properties we own. And we're shuttering a few buildings. And we're thinking outside the box that we don't have to do anything at Chapman. If we modify the plan appropriately, so we're taking care of those special high school kids or differently placed high school kids, as well as some of the other needs, getting all the kindergartners back to their home schools. So I think that's why I'm more supportive of the plans presented. And whether that's the time to list the opinion, I'm just basing it on data, that's been presented to us and discussions that we've been able to have engaging with you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Anybody else?
Just if I could quickly add,
Yes,
it also
Mr.
takes
Martelli.
Darcy offline too. So it takes Darcy and Chapman and Hummus, our 3 oldest buildings, offline, which was one of the charges from the town council to the SMC, and potentially Norton.
Ms. Harrigan?
Yeah, so I don't believe this Board of Ed has come to a consensus on the preferred option. And I don't believe this Board of Ed has discussed enough of the educational aspects of these 2 projects. And I agree with everybody who has said we've got to have
more community input before we move forward calling one of these projects a preferred option and the other one, we'll look at that if the preferred option doesn't work out. My understanding of what came from that meeting with the state department, and I was not there, my understanding was whatever project is right for the community will be funded because we'll have the community support behind us. And so I don't have any kind of problem with having a larger middle school because it includes a 6th grade. Because I also know from working on this project 3-4 years ago that there are ways to build buildings. In middle schools, we use a team approach. So we're always taking the community down to smaller sizes. All of the communication that we've heard from teachers, middle school teachers and 6th grade teachers has been overwhelmingly in support of putting a 6th grade in a middle school model. Everything that I've heard from parents has been they prefer to keep their elementary school small, and the only way to keep the elementary schools small when your enrollment is increasing is to take a grade out. So taking a 6th grade out of the elementary schools keeps them more in line with small neighborhood school sizes. And as Ms. Hallen mentioned, when we have a 6 through 8 middle school, it affects the entire community. What we have with the elementary school project, I think, and this is my opinion, is we have 2 new elementary schools and 2 renovated elementary schools. And I don't know, there's something that seems very unequitable in that scenario. I'm not saying that it's a bad scenario because I do believe it could work. I just think that we do get the bigger bang for our buck by starting out with a 6 through 8 middle school. And I'm in support of that, but I'm mostly in support of that because that's what I'm hearing from people. That's what I'm hearing from my community. And I'll just end with this. I was talking with somebody about the 6 through 8 middle school, and this was the question posed to me. What was wrong with that proposal for a 6 through 8 middle school that the Board of Ed came up with 4 years ago? And I have to say, I have not been convinced to this day, even through all of those school modernization committee meetings that I attended. Nobody has really convinced me that this is not the way to go. I totally understand the financial aspects and trying to keep costs down. And I also understand that that is the purview of the town council. And I thank you for doing that because I'd prefer to look at the educational side of things. But I don't believe that this Board of Ed has looked at the educational values of these projects. I think that the conversation almost always goes to the money and the costs. Let's look at the costs first. Let's make sure that we have the property. And honestly, I just think this Board of Ed needs to say, if we could have whatever, and we weren't paying attention to costs, which project is the most educationally sound? And we have not done that. And just my last comment is, somehow we've got to get this information out to the community and get some people to weigh in. And we can't, it's not good enough to say, oh, people didn't come to the informational meetings in the middle of the summer when we were all on vacation because we just spent a whole year cooped up in our homes from COVID. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Chairman Orr.
Yes, Chairman
A couple
Perugini.
of things. As Catherine and Ann taught, there just remind me a couple of things related to the sixth grade middle school. First, and it wasn't 3 or 4 years ago, it was 6 years ago. When the last board started doing that last study, the plan came out in 16, 17. So it feels like it was yesterday, but it was longer than that. Two things. The Board of Ed has indeed talked about the plans and the merits going back over a year at every board meeting, at every modernization committee update that Andrew and Ann were part of. We had planning committee meetings talking about the proposals that Jeff showed us on the options. It's premature for the board to take an official vote on a plan at this point because they're still missing pieces of information. But I'm pretty sure if we did a show of hands right now, the consensus would be for a preferred option. But as everybody stated, we still need to see the rest of the data points, finances, test fits. And so when we get that information back, we're going to digest it further. I think Dr. Sullivan had a couple ideas on how we communicate this to the public. Because before we go back out to them saying, hey, what do you want? Two things that we know that came up during the open forums in June, not before the summer vacation, but before summer vacation, was these are all great ideas. If you talk to Chapman, yeah, they want a new Chapman. You talk to Norton, they like the idea of a new Norton, but they kind of want to keep what they have as part of that community. Dodd wants a new Dodd. Parents that I hear from, and I hear from everybody, not just who I want to hear from. You can imagine the emails I get even after today's events. I hear from folks. Parents are, I guess, intrigued about the sixth grade middle school. They don't really know what it means to them. Some parents love the smaller environments. Elementary schools don't want to see a sixth grade middle school. Not all the teachers were surveyed for 6 through 8. There was a small subset. But nonetheless, everybody wants something. And that's very positive because there's tremendous support in the community to do something. I think we're all on the same page, want to do the right things. So my ask is, one thing that came up in the last study, and my opinion is I consider the work that the Modernization Committee did, which I was a part of, an extension of the work that the board did, because we ended trying to get something to referendum at that time, believing that we're going to run out of state aid or get cut. And we never picked up the discussion about other options. But one of the lures that came up with the sixth grade middle school 6 years ago was we were looking at either renovating all buildings or building all new buildings. And then we looked at the timeline for that. And that put it out past 30 years. To Catherine's point, we may never get to all these buildings. And being realistic, if you sequence this out, it probably wouldn't get done in my lifetime. So how can we speed that up? And one of the ideas was sixth grade middle school, both for some of the educational merits, as Anna has alluded to, for the sixth graders. But the fact that using that as a swing space by freeing up Dodd so that when we do get to the point of renovating Highland, Doolittle, Chapman, and others, we can move those kids to existing Dodd for a year and speed up the renovation of that building, because it takes longer when they're in the building than it is when they're not. So the theory was timely renovation to existing buildings and possibly some cost savings. So I know Catherine doesn't like hearing a non-preferred option, but option 2A, my ask is, if there's time, I would at least like to see the financial analysis done, that if a 6 through 8 was done, is there any savings alluded to time or money that might offset the cost of doing that? We just don't know. But that was something that did come up as one of the driving factors last time around for what it's worth. And the Modernization Committee never got to that point anyway, but that's it. And I don't know if Dr. Sullivan wanted to say anything. I know he's hiding in the far end.
I'll just jump on this mic.
Okay.
I'll use this mic, Mr. Salamini. Yes. I'll use this mic because Marilyn's already the hardest working stenographer in show business, so I don't want to make it any harder on her. Thank you, Mr. Perugini. I also want to just take a minute to acknowledge all of you who spend so much of your time, all of us in the same vein, dedicated to improving the educational facilities in our community. And that is universal agreement, and it makes me feel that we are close to a solution. And for me, we talked about what the educational merits of either decision are. frankly, we're 5th in Connecticut right now in terms of our performance. You're not going to do better than that by switching schools. You're not, I don't think you'll necessarily do worse. I do recognize that providing 6th grade exposure to different coursework and things is a nice benefit for our students, but it's not going to mean that they're getting a mediocre education now and it's going to all of a sudden be world class. I think they're getting a world class education now. It'd just be nuanced improvement. So for me, at the end of the day, I think both of these proposals work from an educational perspective. However, what I think is probably most critical is what the community thinks is the way to go. Like, neither of these work if the community won't adopt it. At the end of the day, when there's probably less than 50 voters in this room, and many more people will need to make a critical decision about the future of our school system and community. And so, I do think that there's a real benefit to identifying, the elements of each plan at a high level, sharing that out with the community in terms of what does this mean for us fiscally, both decisions, what does this mean for us, logistically, what properties are we using, et cetera, and which one do we most support? Because for me, the worst case scenario is to put in literally, as Tony mentioned, years. We'll be closing in on a decade before we know it of effort to find out on whatever the day after the referendum is that this isn't what the town wanted. I mean, that to me would be a difficult blow. So, to get some sort of sense of that, I think would be great. But again, as I said, I think both of these options work from an educational standpoint. Now, financially, if the answer was absolutely no way does this work for us, well, that makes the decision a bit easier. But if we're looking at that and we think that we could fiscally tolerate both options, I think at that point it makes sense to solicit the feedback of the people that are going to really be most vested in this in the long run.
Thank you, Dr. Solon. Yes, Mr. Walsh and then Ms. Nichols.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate those words there. First, Mr. Talbot, I appreciate you bringing up the March 17th meeting. I know exactly where I was on March 17th. I typically am not sitting in a meeting, though. This Irishman is normally somewhere else, but I do remember that. And I think the reason we brought that resolution forward was because after hearing about the state and what their expectations were in order for us to jump over hurdles to get to the middle school, it was going to be a difficult ask for this community. And at the end, we did end up sending two options, the preferred option and the secondary option. Like our chair said, the first option, if it doesn't work out fiscally for us, or educationally for the Board of Ed, we're going to look at the second option. But we need to focus on one right now. That was forwarded at a 9-3 vote. So the majority of the people who worked hard, and I was one of them on the School Modernization Committee for a year and a half, we put a lot of time and effort into it. The public had many opportunities to come to these meetings, and unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of input. And I would love to hear more input from them, but I don't know how much more input we're going to get, even if we put it out there, unless we take a vote. And I don't see that happening. My biggest thing is the ADA compliancy in some of our buildings. I was saddened to hear one member of the SMC say that, in Chapman, we don't need to worry too much about ADA compliancy because there aren't that many kids who have to get to the second floor. And that's a sad statement because, it's not just for the students, it's for the teachers, it's for the parents, it's for, visitors. That school needs to be fixed, as does Humiston. This preferred option, option one, I hate to say preferred, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to say preferred, is would shutter for schools if we add Humiston into it. The 4 oldest buildings we have, and that's what our charge was, is to come up with school modernization. What better way of modernizing our schools but to close the 4 oldest buildings and build 2 new buildings? I think that's the way we need to look. I believe there's a big difference in dollars too between the two options. And Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was about a $50 or $60 million difference between the two options. Am I,
believe that's for the initial phase one.
phase one? Yes, I'm
Yeah,
talking about
for the-
phase one, yeah.
Yes, for initial phase.
That's
it's
a big
approximately-
hit. Now, I know, Peter said that he hears from most people that they prefer the middle school. I don't hang in the same circles as Peter, but I hear from other people saying they want what's going to be the best plan, and as long as it's affordable for all. And it's not just the parents. I mean, remember, the parents, yes, the parents all have their ideas of what they want, but 80% of this town don't use the schools. So we have to look at those other 80% and say, how are they going to be affected in their taxes? And we are charged with making sure that any project we put forward is fiscally responsible, and I'm going to make sure that that's how I'm going to look at this. Like Andrew said, when I came into the SFC, I said, "Oh, new high school, that would be the perfect plan." Then I said, "Oh, new middle school, yeah, that's the perfect plan." And then after going through this process for a year and a half, we felt that the best plan was the two elementary schools, and that's how I'm looking at it. But like Chairman Orr said, if we don't all get behind whatever plan we come up with, it's not going to pass. So we have to all be on the same page, and put aside our differences or whatever it is, and just say yes, okay. Whether it's the middle school or whether it's the two elementary schools, whatever it is, we're going to have to say this is what we're going to do, and because if we don't, we're going to be back to square one in another year or two, and that's not where we want to be. Because from what I think Superintendent Sullivan said, if we don't pass anything, we're going to be back to temporary buildings outside of our schools, and security. That's not going to fly back for me. I very concerned about the security of those buildings, as well as I don't want to be putting kids in temporary buildings. So that's my opinion on this. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. Nichols?
Yeah, Don, I appreciate all that, and much of what you just said is what I was thinking. We toured many school districts who put schools, and we went to brand new schools and we went to renovated schools. And at the end of the day, it was very difficult to make any discernible difference between the remodeled or renovated as new school and the brand new school. So let's put aside that feeling of inequity, because you were there, Ann, at some of those schools, and they were like brand new schools. So I don't see that being a problem. What I do agree that we need to have the public on board for whatever we decide. It seems to me that our job as the leaders of the education part and the financial part need to come to the public with the best decision that we can make for the most people in town. Now, I understand there's a very wide constituency of parents of children. I was one. My kids went through the Cheshire schools. My grandchildren went through Cheshire schools. But there is a greater number of people who do not have children in the school, I believe, and who have an opinion. And so those people who are very, very vocal right now are the ones with the kids in school. And I respect their opinions and their requests and their feeling that they need to provide certain things for their kids. I was in a group of people of various age groups, so it wasn't just the older generation, the other night. And we had this discussion at the table. And there were two people at that group who said, "Oh yeah, Cheshire's doing something about modernizing school. What are they doing? I haven't paid any attention to that." All right. Those are the people we need to convince that we're doing the right job for. So isn't it our job as the professionals here to present the best plan? And we've saw it in other communities where the Board of Education and the council or whoever was in charge came to the public and said, they didn't ask everybody's opinion, not that we're not, and I don't mean that people shouldn't have input. So I have to be careful about that statement, because people should have input and they should bring it to us as the people who have to make those decisions. But we have to respect that you've put this group of people in charge of making a decision, and we need to trust our paid people who have advised us, and we need to respect the educators who are going to develop the programs, and we at the council who are going to spend your tax money. And we represent not only the parents of the schools, but the business owners and the retirees and all the other people who have a stake in the way we spend your money. So it seems to me this is a place that we need to lead by looking at the best option, not just what we think is the most important for ourselves. That's hard because I agree with some of the things on both sides of the issue. But somewhere we have to make that decision. And I think if we do that and we act as a unified group here, that once a decision is made, there can't be back talks. Well, we should have done this and we didn't do that. This is what we're proposing. We support this project because we believe this is the best project for the town. And we hope that you will too, because if we don't do this, your children will not have any changes in your school system for another 10 years. And none of us want that. None of us want that. We all want the kids to have a good experience in school. And we want the teachers to teach, but somewhere we have to just stand up and lead through this process. After all those SMC meetings, I'm tired of all the conversation. I'm sorry, but I'm at the point where I have to say, we have to make a decision, folks. We have the information. We have the facts. We just have to get on with it. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Yes, Ms. Ham.
I have just a couple of probably rhetorical questions, but I think they need to be put out there. One of the things I've heard about putting the sixth graders in the 6th through 8 middle school is that we will isolate them. And I guess from the 7th and 8th graders because of just the maturity levels. And I find it sort of disconcerting. I'll say, why are we going to isolate the children by putting them together? I think, I would love to hear an answer. We're going to put them together to keep them separate. To me, it doesn't make sense. As a with regard to inequitable, I've heard that come up before, and I just have to ask the question, is it equitable to leave the majority of our youngsters in schools that are subpar because we're going to build a middle school? And then finally, I hear it's, we should just not be concerned about the money. 35% of our population in this town is working its way toward a fixed income. And when you're looking at an average monthly cost of $700 in increased mill rates, at least according to the report in April, versus $1,100, that nearly $400 difference is huge. And I don't think we can ignore them. And as Sylvia says, we need to get them on board. I don't know that they're going to be able to swallow an $1,100 per month tax bill. It's a lot to ask of them, and they are a vital part of this community. I don't think we want to see them go. Per year. But sorry. But it's still, you can drive up and down any one of the streets, and there are people who cannot afford that. So, I know it's more than just a meal once a month. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ham. Just a couple of comments and thoughts, I guess. And this is a tough conversation because it's not an easy final decision for all of us. We all feel very strongly about what we think is in the best interest of the community. I don't question anyone's motives that's in this room. So thank you for that. But we do have differences of opinion, and we have differences that I think we're looking to accomplish. And so for me, I've heard a lot about we need to have input from the community, from a lot of people I respect. We've done that. We've tried to do that. And there's no question we need to have input from the community as long as we can give them good information to make an educated decision. And Ms. Harrigan asked, well, what's the difference from what happened however many years ago today? Well, the difference is we're trying to get quality information to the public so they can make an educated decision. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not about personal opinions as to what plan is better than the other. I really don't give a rat's you-know-what about which plan goes forward educationally. That's your job to tell us. And what I've heard from the superintendent and the leaders of the school system is that either plan makes sense and works. That's great. Rob Orris doesn't know enough about the educational side of this community to opine to that. You're the experts, and that's what we're relying on. We've also asked the School Modernization Committee to do a lot of work. We were concerned that we didn't have a broad enough base of this community involved in this process because the first time it was a Board of Ed only run project. That's it. Council didn't have much input. nor did, well, you probably had public input, but there wasn't a bipartisan or diverse group of people that played a role in developing that plan, to my knowledge. And so we asked the SMC to do their work. They worked tirelessly for a year and a half. It was a struggle, as you all know. It was a tough process. But they got through it, and they worked hard for the betterment of this community. And whether we want to slice and dice this one way or another, they advanced a plan, their primary plan. We can say, well, there's a backup, there's this. If it suits your personal needs to say there's a backup, great, there's a backup. What I see is a 9-3 vote that advanced one plan that is their primary plan that we should be looking at. And I've also heard from the school system, Superintendent Solon, Dr. Solon just said it now. Both plans work. We've heard from the state of Connecticut. The middle school is not their preferred option. Can we sell it to them? Sure. But why do we need to? And finally, for me, the fiscal impacts. We're trying to find a plan that's affordable for this community. We don't have an open checkbook, folks. So if we could all sit here and we had Daddy Warbucks writing the check, yeah, that's great. Let's build all brand new schools. But the fact of the matter is the cheaper option that we're looking at, which is the 2 elementary schools, potentially could increase our mill rate 5 to 6 mills in the foreseeable future. And we talk about giving good information to the community. You hear people, well, would you support school modernization if your tax bill went up $200 a year? Who wouldn't say yes to that? That's not good information. When you look at the way we bond our projects, that's false information. Now, I'm not saying someone's lying, but the reality is it's how you spin the numbers. And so what we're trying to do here as a council is let you all do the work relative to the educational side of this, honor the hard work that school modernization did, which I will do. And I will tell you flat out, I've said this from the beginning. If we're going to go back and evaluate more than the plan that was advanced, I will recommend it go back to school modernization. They reconvene and we start the process over. That's where I stand. I'm one of 9 members. But the reality is they did their work and I'm going to respect that. And the school system has not told us as a council that either plan doesn't work. So now, for me, it's about how we make this affordable for everyone in this community. I'm not even convinced the 2 elementary schools are affordable yet. That's why we're doing the work we're doing, folks, right now with developing a detailed 10-year plan to show you when you go into the voting booth and decide whether you want to say yay or nay to this, that you're making that decision based on good information, whether it's $1,100 a year or $1,500 a year, or when this plan gets fully implemented, whether it's $5,000 a year. The community needs to know that information. And if we don't give it to them, shame on us. That's what they elected all of us for. You as a Board of Ed and me as a town council member. And I will not live up to that expectation. So we can dance around this. We can debate it for the next 6 months. That's not going to help this community, folks. And maybe I'm taking a little more liberty because I'm not running for council. The room's filled now because it's an election season, folks. Don't let anyone kid you. That's why there's a lot of people here today. This is election season, and this is a big election issue. Well, you know what? We're all motivated to do what's right for this community. Let's get together. Let's move a plan forward. Nobody's going to be fully happy with everything. I can guarantee you that. But if we can't find a plan that's based in some fiscal modeling that works, this plan's dead. I'm worried about 5 or 6 mills already with the cheaper of the 2 plans. And we haven't even included Humiston yet, which I think ought to be included. I think it's important. So we can keep dancing around these 2 plans all you want. You know what? I'm going to respect what school modernization did. I'm going to respect the fact that the experts educationally are telling me it's a toss-up. Whether you guys have deliberated it properly or not, that's up to you. I believe you have. There's some people against it, but maybe you need to take a vote. We'll do the same. But the reality is I'm really not interested in just keeping debating this, which plan should go forward. It's pretty clear to me. I want to focus on how we make one of these plans affordable. And right now it's the cheaper of the 2 plans. The plan that was advanced by school modernization. Chairman Neff is here. I hope he speaks tonight. I'm going to honor the work that you all put into this. It was a broad-based group from both sides of the aisle that worked on this plan, and it was a 9-3 vote at the end. I don't care what anybody says. That's what happened. So, let's work on a plan that is affordable. Again, I think we need to get back in the numbers. We've just started this financial modeling, And we've got a long way to go yet, in my opinion, in order to have a chance that the taxpayers will support this. 5 to 6 mils is a lot of money, folks. That's just phase one of this project. I think we're worried about stuff that whether it's one plan or the other. Let's get something started for this community. That's what we want. But if it's not affordable, it's going nowhere. And that's my biggest issue right now. And so I'm sorry to be up on my soapbox, but we need to lead. Ms. Nichols, you said it very, very well. We've been elected to lead. We need input from the Board of Ed, the school system, the public, but we were put in a position to lead. Let's do our jobs, folks. And let's find a plan that can be affordable. If it's not affordable, it's not going anywhere. I won't support a plan that I don't think everyone across this community can afford. We got a lot of people on fixed incomes that can ill afford $1,000 or $2,000 a year. So we need to figure out how to make it affordable for them. And that's where I stand. And I'm not ashamed to say it. So, Tony Perugini?
Time's out. So I know the work you put into this. In fact, since you came out of town. So one thing I wanted to say is the fact that we're all here, both bodies, talking about a $500 million potential plan, worst case, and we're taking it very seriously, and we're trying to get something going and bring something to the town. If you told me 10 years ago that was going to happen, I would have laughed at you, because we couldn't get much past 10 years ago. So I do believe your presence on this town council has helped tremendously. It started 8 years ago. So we take it seriously. You take it seriously. This is a good place to be. What I want to say is, from the Board of Ed's point of view, we get past the analysis. I personally would like to know from the town council, if we're even there yet, sounds like not. What do you believe is affordable by the town? And to your point, Rob, are those 2 elementary schools, phase one, shutting the other schools and savings? Can the town afford that? Do we even know that? I'm not taking that for granted. It'd be nice to know. And the reason why we want to know these things, we're not going to have it tonight, but for the board to even take a vote. I am not going to put a vote before the board until the Board of Education, Dr. Solon, and his team have a chance to engage our CPS community on where we're going with this. That hasn't fully happened yet. So one of the things that OSCGR will be looking for is, hey, did the board, in making their decision, get enough feedback from the CPS community? And we'll make sure that happens. It's hard for us to do that if we don't have all these pieces together. Finance is a big part of it, but location. Where are these schools going to be? What does it mean to my neighborhood? Already I'm seeing disinformation out there that this plan shutters neighborhood schools, makes them too big. I saw posts on Facebook on the forums where I spent way too much time lately, that the mill rate's going to double. Those people don't have all the facts. And how can the board engage our CPS community when we don't have the facts? So we need that. I don't think we're quite there yet. So that being said, do know that when the time comes, when the town council makes a decision, hopefully we're right there with you. If I'm on the board, before the board takes a vote, we're going to make sure that we engage our teachers, our parents, our stakeholders, the CPS community, so they understand what this means to them. Because the worst thing to do is take a vote, not get their feedback, and it fails the referendum. And I'm not saying we need a big campaign on which option is better, but again, so we have to do that. I have to do that as a board or a chair if I'm here. So again, anything you can give us, we'll take to our community, get that feedback, and if something changes in that one, that way you'll know about it. But I think by the time we'll get there, we'll know. So we're with you. I guess the question I have is, we'll certainly talk more about this, but I know there's some test fits that were done. There's some financial analysis update. I would love to hear some of that, where we are with that, and but I leave that to you.
Well, and that's on the agenda, Tony. So thank you. Appreciate your comments. And having that financial information, we're certainly going to give it to you. It's public information. We just started working on this development of a cash flow. I spent some time with staff trying to develop what I thought was a good kind of an outline of it. We talked about it last meeting as a council. We made some comments, suggestions, some changes. Obviously, those numbers will change based on the new capital budget that was just adopted. And the goal of that is to give to the taxpayers an understanding of what the impacts are to them based on school modernization, phase one. That's all we're including at the moment is phase one, plus all of the other things that we feel we need to continue to invest in and all of the things that are going on financially within the community, which unfortunately was too much to ask SMC to try to tackle. So, that is our job. And we're trying to make sure that when this does go to the taxpayers, they have that information because again, there are things that are going to come down the pike financially that are going to impact, everyone's pocketbook. It's not just school modernization, so we can't look at it in a vacuum. And that's what we're doing. You can walk that path with us. You were at the last meeting, so I know you are. If any Board of Ed members, you're welcome to our meetings. We'll be happy to share the information. It's all public at this point. And whatever input you have comments or questions, please get them into us so that we can develop this financial model as quickly as we possibly can. Now, again, it's based on the plan that's being proposed, which at least to me is a little cheaper plan than the alternative. Now, the difference, I ran some numbers earlier. I'm a numbers guy, and the difference, I think, I used a 20-year bond, 2.5% borrowing base. I don't know if that's good or bad down the road, but the difference in the two plans is about $2 million a year in additional debt service. That's my calculations. I'll have to confirm with Mr. Jaska. It's not insignificant. It's a lot of money. And again, the plan we're looking at is already potentially running up 5-6 mils, depending on how it gets implemented and other things that are going on. So that's really where the rubber meets the road for the taxpayer. And that's how I think they're going to make their decision. So we need to continue walking that path together, Tony, and I'm happy to do it. Other questions or comments, Mr. Slocum, and then we'll get to the test fit. I know it's been a long, but I think it's a meaningful dialogue we're having.
Yeah, and I think I echo a number of my colleagues, comments up here, primarily about cost, expense, and all the benefits associated with it. I agree strongly with Sylvia that this has to be led by our decision-making. And the information we give the public, I think, is critical. And to that end, I think, as Rob said, we're almost there in my mind. I'm going to be influenced by the expense to the public because I think this is the heaviest lift we're going to present them, period. And that's the survey that we have to wait the longest for. It's really the only one that matters. So whatever package we deliver to them to vote, they are going to be the survey taker. And we probably know who are the most responsible voters in town. And they tend to be those that want to save the most. I could be mistaken on that, but I know that's a crowd I hear from. And we would also like to encourage, with a good plan, a greater amount of people voting. And you don't want to get it to exclusively be the naysayers that don't want to spend any money. So we have to deliver the best product possible. I think what's been presented as Plan 1, the top of the list, the 9-3 vote, is the plan I'm sticking with. I don't think we ask survey questions to decide which ones we should develop, one or two. I think we're there, as Rob said, and I'm going to I just wanted to sort of reiterate that statement strongly so you know how I feel. And I think a number of us up here feel that way too. We'd like to go forward with the best information on what has been presented as the preferred plan. And that's where I'll leave it lay.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Barwi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's clear that if you look at all three phases, the third phase, the high school, is the same cost no matter which one you have. If you look at phase 1 and 2, although I know your plan called 2 and 3 together, but if you look at phases, what would be phase 1 and 2, they're more expensive for the middle school option if it's a new middle school and then you add in the remodeling of the other schools. That is more expensive by the amount of money we spend on the largest capital project ever. And that's not insignificant. The mayor just said it, $2 million is just back of the envelope number. I mean, that's an awful lot of difference that I don't think we could go out and expect to get support for that from the community when the educational difference is not considered significant by you, the educators. I think we're clear that at $87 million, phase 1 is 3 times almost the largest capital project we have ever had. And that lost a referendum. And that's sewage. That lost a referendum. And then it passed again a year and a half later, was revamped and all worked. So this project's going to be significantly more than that. And if you're telling us that the educational component of this and the educational benefits of it are similar to both of them, because they both have pluses and minuses. Certainly, no plan, we've heard this, no plan is perfect. And there are going to be people who want specifically this or specifically that. I know there's some things I want. I know enough about it to know that there's this or that. But we're all going to have to work together. It's got to be 16, I went to Cheshire schools. Got to be all 16 of us having to be together on this. I said 15 because there's only 15 here tonight. So we've got to work together on this, but I think we've got some numbers ready. I don't know, Rob, if you wanted to get into that much detail tonight, but with the reduction in the capital budget, staff has already worked on numbers. And, we're looking at capital budget is 6 mils. This project alone is going to be 2.5 of that. Just this project alone.
Well, yeah, we definitely want to get into that. That's part of the next piece of the meeting. I'd like to get the test fit conversation going. We did contract for the test fit on the Norton property. Anxious to see the results on that. And then certainly we want to see where we stand with any updated information from Mr. Jascott based on our comments and questions last meeting, including our capital budget adoption. And again, like you said, we're at 5-6 mils. Again, it's not all school modernization, but with everything that's going on in the community, that's where we may end up. And that's with the cheaper plan. It's not insignificant. And if the taxpayers want that, that's fine. I have no problem sending that out to let the community make that decision. But I want to be confident that they have good information to base their decision on when they do. And that's really all we're trying to accomplish. And that's where I see the difference is between a number of years ago and where we are today. That we want to have better information for the taxpayers when they walk into that voting booth. So other questions or comments before we move on, or anything from members of the Board of Ed on this? We'll get to the test fit next, hopefully. Mr. Grippo?
I just wanted to say one final thing. Folks. Hey now. All right. I'm going to stand right back here. Let's try that. We've at the Board of Ed, we have discussed a lot of, well, if money was no object, what would we want to do, right? But the reality is that money is important. Money is important to a lot of people in this town. Money is important to me. Many people in this town are all property owners. We all pay a lot of property taxes. And we know this is going to be a significant increase to our property taxes. And so to be able to know, I think even years ago, I made the point, having a budget to know what the project is going to be is very helpful in decision making. And so I'm very much looking forward to the financial report, the final financial report. I made public comments on this several weeks ago about the debt. I always do this, the debt wave, right? You can borrow $150 million now, yes, but that affects your ability to borrow more money in the future for all the other things that we wish to do. And so what is the most effective way to manage our debt? We've been very proud of our AAA debt rating, our credit rating. And in order for us to have a successful, cohesive plan, we need to manage that debt. And I think you guys are really working towards putting that plan together, and I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you, Mr. Grippo. Can we move to the test fit unless there's other questions or comments? Gentlemen, can we get to the test fit?
Yeah, sure. So if I could, I'm going to introduce Moser Pylon Nelson. They were the firm selected to develop the test fit at the Norton site. Dave Simons is at the podium. He'll be presenting his partner, Hugh Pearson. Moser Pylon, coincidentally, was the architect of record for the Eli Terry School in Philip R. Smith in South Windsor that some of you went to visit for that. So if you had the opportunity to see those, you can see it was great work and very qualified. So I'll pass it off to Dave once we get running here.
Thanks. Is this on? Okay. while we wait for the projectors, again, thanks, Chuck. I'm Dave Simons with Moser Pylon, and my partner Hugh Pearson is here as well. We were hired to do the test fit for the Norton School site. And based on the information from the projections, really what we're looking at is an approximately 100,000 square foot school on the building site.
You have it on the other side or not? You have it? No.
It says input NA. Is there a different input?
Okay. It says frequency is out of range. I think we.
Okay.
I'm going to try and switch device.
Okay. Is that the right input?
Yeah, well, that's up to Mike. Mike, is that the right input? Input A?
It should auto select. I had it on the screen at the back. Was it
So
not
you
on
can
it?
see it?
I did a second.
What is out of range message?
It's on the
So
screen.
while we're waiting, I just want to let the public know that there will be an opportunity for public comment towards the end of the meeting, for those of you who would like to speak.
Is it flickering? None of this down here. There it is. There it is. What'd you do?
There it is.
Just push that in a little bit. Oh, did you do that, Mike?
I just hit display.
Could have been a quick one.
I fixed it. Don't touch it.
Thank you.
So just use the
The arrows up
The right
there.
arrow.
Right arrow. Okay, thanks. Okay. Oh, good. All right.
Oh, quick. Oh, quick.
That's the old, oh, well. What are you gonna do? Is everyone back or should I wait a moment?
No, you're good.
Okay, I'll go. All right. So as I mentioned, we were hired to do the test fit at the Norton Elementary School site, which is off of Route 42. The first thing we did was really kind of discuss with the educators or with Jeff and Vin about just a little bit about the school, the system, what some of the needs and desires were. Following that, Moser Pylon Nelson and one of our engineers from LRC, who is a site civil and landscape architect, we did a site visit and looked at all the features on the site. We walked the woods, we walked the property, just really trying to ascertain, with topography, water, potential wetlands, any other utility issues, what was happening on the sites and what might be a challenge. I think some of the major features that come into play on the north and east side of the site is this open water ditch that's right on the edge of the property line. And that creates a wetland buffer setback. And you can see that as kind of the heavy cyan line that's on the north and east side of the site. But knowing that this is in a residential neighborhood, we weren't too concerned about that because we were trying to keep a wooded buffer from the neighbors. And I think in short, when we get into the actual test fits, you're going to see that really the backside of this site provides ample room for a facility and adequate vehicular traffic around the building. So we were able to keep a wooded buffer on the edges, which will help with the privacy for the neighbors. Obviously, these folks that have woods in their backyards, it's going to be quite a shock as people start coming in and clearing the back edge of this site. You can see the building on the lower half, the existing Norton School. It does pose some challenges on the site because it really, in terms of the width where the site bottlenecks on the south end, it does create access issues around the building. There's really only one driveway that sneaks around the building that gives access to the backfields and what is probably more than half the parking on the site for the school, the existing school. In terms of topography, at the northwest corner is the low point, and really all the water on the site flows to that point. And really right at the point of that, where that point on the northwest corner is right at that creek, that's approximately elevation 145. And then as you go east along that back, you rise up to approximately 155. And so as I refer to these elevations, I just want to give you a little bit of the lay of the land. The ball fields that are behind the school now, the existing fields in that clearing, are at elevation 160. And the majority of the wooded area, besides where we kind of drop down significantly in the northwest corner, the majority of the topography in the wooded area where we look to locate a potential building, it really averages 160. And so that's pretty constant. We have some low points down at 155, and we have a few high mounds at 165. But, on average, as you go in there and start clearing the site and working the topography, that's going to level out to 160 pretty evenly. So it gives us a very nice flat plateau in the middle of this available area of the site. And so that's very important for ease of construction and being able to locate a building. And so when we got into the test fits, we did a number of really loose sketches looking at different building configurations and how that might react or fit on the site. And so this is an example of one of the better working test fits. This is what we call the L scheme. And so, again, you can see the lower half of the site where it necks down. That's where the existing facility is now. The idea is that, Norton School will remain in use during construction. So we really need to stay clear of the footprint of the existing building and the surrounding vehicular circulation. So we're really trying to keep everything up on the north end of this site. And so all the test fits that we did really looked at a building footprint that's well clear of the existing so that there can be clear delineation between school activity and construction activity. And so all these test fits really allow a contractor to come on site and work in the kind of on their own on the back end of this site or the north side of the site, have good access around the building pad where they need to, move around as they're constructing the building and the surrounding features. Whenever we design a school, especially a new school, not only are we looking at the building and how that sits and works programmatically, but we want to make sure that vehicular traffic around the building works well. A lot of focus is on safety, both for pedestrians and also vehicular crossing and vehicular traffic. And so what we really try to do is keep the bus traffic and car traffic separated as much as we can. And so on all these schemes, what you're going to see is a separate bus drop-off loop and a separate parent drop-off loop. And so on this scheme, for instance, off of 42, we would have this new drive. Once the existing building is demolished, the contractors are able to back off the site, finish the site work, and make this connection where all visitors' parents would come in off of where they do now on 42. They would go up this driveway, they would go straight, and then on kind of the west side of that building, there's a very long parent drop-off where cars can queue up, drop. Students can enter the building through one of the main entrances, which are always monitored these days. And then the cars can then loop around, go through the loop, back to the central intersection, and then back down that main driveway and out on the 42. Again, keeping vehicular traffic separate, this is where we really have looked at the potential for this connection to Sharon Drive. We know from our site due diligence, you can see on the upper right-hand corner, there is a parcel of property there that really appears to be a right-of-way or a connection to Sharon Drive. Right now, we do know that there's pipe utilities or storm drainage that comes from some of the neighborhoods that then is piped and daylighted to that storm creek that goes along the north edge of the property. But I think it's right from day one, this was something that everyone was really interested in making use of for a number of reasons. And, you know, when you're looking at your school functioning, ideally, the proposal here is to bring buses in from Sharon Drive, bring them in on the bus loop around the back of the building, and then those buses can queue up on the front of the building, separate from the car traffic, and either discharge in the morning or when the kids are dismissed, pick up their kids. They would then go to that main intersection where there would be four-way stops, and they would go out onto 42 at that point. I think an important feature to that bus loop, especially when we're introducing the potential for a connection to Sharon, is that it's only buses, it's only one way. So really the traffic is limited to however many buses there are serving this school at the beginning of the day and then at the end of the day. And so that would be it, and it would be one-way traffic. Secondary, this access provides emergency entrance and egress from the site, which is a very important consideration these days when we look at, you know, school security, emergency access. We're always looking, every school system we talk to, they're always looking for that kind of back door. When we engage with the, you know, first responders, the police, they're always interested in having this ability as well to enter the site or have an emergency exit off the site. From a construction standpoint, obviously all this construction activity is on the north end of the site. That access would be very important for getting construction vehicles onto site, keeping them away from the school building. Again, we really want to bisect this site, keeping the construction activities completely on the north half. If I go back to the aerial, you can see the left side of the building has those portables or temporary classrooms. I don't know how temporary they are. I'm not sure what vintage they are, but I'm sure those have been there a number of years. But on the right side of the building where that wing pushes towards the west boundary, there is only room for a small two-way drive to go around past the property line there. And again, I noted there's a lot of parking in the back for staff. And obviously the play fields are back there. If we were not able to make use of that access off of Sharon Drive, then if this were to be viable, we would need to figure out some way to get construction activity through that narrow drive while school's in session. And so that was probably one of the bigger potential issues with this. So it does make that connection very important. We've noted on the test fit that these are all potential connections for the bus loops on the north. They don't have to be. We can easily loop the buses back around, bring them back around the back of the parking, and then back out the way they come in. So it doesn't have to be a permanent connection, but I think construction-wise, to make this a comfortable process, a safe process, that's something that really needs to be considered. In terms of the building configuration, this L has a 2-story classroom wing on the south edge of the building. Really right at the knuckle facing the major traffic intersection is the administration, so that the admin really has good site supervision over all the comings and goings, both pedestrian-wise and vehicular. And then the specials, the gym, the cafeteria, the arts are on the wing going north. At night, when public might use the building, all those larger public type areas, the gymnasium, the cafeteria, where meetings, after school rec, things like that happen, you can all use the secondary entrances that are directly off of the larger parking lot for people to access the building. The classroom wing can be secured, locked down. So it really keeps the public in that north end where the major assembly areas are. And again, that bus drop is only one way. And so during the day when the kids are in session, there's nobody driving around the back part of that building because it's really only a secure bus loop, unless there's some emergency vehicles that need to come down there. And so this L-shaped building really creates a safe play area in the back for the kids where they don't need to interact with the traffic at all. They can pour out of the cafeteria, the gymnasium, the classroom wing, get directly out into these play areas where they're secure away from vehicular traffic. And again, the darker green around the perimeters, that's the buffer, the wooded buffer that is able to remain so we keep some privacy and distance from the neighbors. In the front half of the site, after the existing building gets removed, again, the contractors would back out off the site, finish the site features, the driveways, the rest of the parking. And then you can see on the test fit, we've been able to fit a number of play fields. And so the rectangles represent a U12 youth soccer field. So that's approximately 70 yards long by 50 yards wide. And then the bottom field is a softball or little league field. And the foul lines on that are 200 feet, which is typical for younger kids. And then at the front of the site, there's an existing play area in the front, which could remain or be, renovated. And you have the ability for additional parking up front on the site for people to make use of the play fields and the play areas. So again, I think in terms of the amount of fields, this is well beyond what's on the existing site. So it does represent the ability to very comfortably provide what the school needs and then some. This is the second test fit that we wanted to show. This is a little more compact building. It's a courtyard scheme. I think some of the administration had concerns because courtyards, exterior courtyards that are enclosed within a building just become a little more difficult to maintain for maintenance staff to get in. Typically, we would dedicate storage off that courtyard so they can store mowers and hand equipment. You can't just drop your mower, do all the play fields, and then take care of that courtyard easily. So there's that aspect of this, but it does provide a smaller building footprint overall. And what we did here a little bit differently with the traffic pattern, we pushed the entry drive off of 42 to the west side of the site and brought that 2-lane traffic loop up. So as cars enter, they would go past the play fields, they would get up to where that parking lot is, and they would take the first right. And then they would be able to either loop into the parking lot or go right along the front west edge of the building where the administration is. And that would be, again, a long parent drop-off queue area. And then they would go up to that top loop, take a left, and then take the 2-way traffic back out. In this scenario, buses could enter off of 42, follow the same path, but go straight past the parking, follow the top loop up, and then along the north edge of the building, where the gymnasium and cafeteria are in the morning and in the end of the day, buses could queue up in that driveway and then exit out onto Sharon Drive. During the day, that entry into that bus lane could be gated off so that no cars could get in there, because that provides a hard playscape for the kids. When, again, a lot of times kids come out from cafeteria or gym, they would be able to go right out onto that bus drop area, no traffic there during the day, and then they could access all the play areas without having to cross any vehicular traffic. Again, a lot of the buffer around the perimeter from the neighbors has been preserved. Again, most of these tree lines are a good 60, 80 feet off of the property line, well clear of any wetlands or any of the zoning setbacks that we need to be worried about. So again, I think, you know, both of these scenarios, while they provide different building layouts, different ideas about the vehicular traffic, illustrate that we can fit a new elementary school on this site, maintain the existing building while construction happens. And then as the new existing building goes down and the contractor backs out, there's a lot of available options on how the front part of that site gets developed once the building's removed. And so those were the two final test fits that we kind of focused on to show some variation of features. Happy to answer any questions or.
Questions, Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Excellent job. On either one of the scenarios that you're showing there, can you tell me where the existing footprint is? Is it at the edge of in this one, at the edge of the northernmost or the southernmost line of the northernmost parking lot?
Yeah, I think in both schemes, you can see actually here the drive lane below the parking is a little below where it was on the last one. But really that existing building is, in this case, it's probably right on the bottom drive to the left of the bus drop.
So right at the end of where the play field
Yes.
is.
So I believe you toured Eli Terry. Is that correct? Or in South Windsor, one of the schools. Yeah. So that very similar, where they had the existing building functioning with the new building being built in the play fields. In the summer, as the use of the surrounding around the existing buildings, once they didn't need that, the contractor was able to expand their activities and quickly build out the remaining roads and driveways. So that parking lot that's very large and is going to have a lot of drainage, underground utilities and whatnot, that will all be able to be built while the existing school is still functioning. And really, it's just the driveways connecting to that and the play fields that will need to be finalized once we start backing out of the site.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that the play fields that you see on the western side of the property represent the old footprint.
Yes.
Or pretty close.
Pretty close, yes.
So if you're looking on the eastern side of that top playground, that is, well, it used to be 6th grade when I was there, but it's probably 4th and 5th now, because 6th grade went downstairs. It looks like, and there are windows all along that side. How close would that be to where construction would be taking place to the classroom or the admin area that would be the closest to those windows?
Yeah, I mapped this out a little bit. And so the northeast corner of that 2-story addition off the back of the school.
Yep.
Again, you're right. It's right along the north edge of that play field, but it's probably the northeast corner is probably 2/3 of the way across that field, going from west to east. And so you are a good 200 feet between buildings at that point.
Okay. Going along where you have the wetlands buffer that goes along the eastern side and then the northern side. And then you've got the potential right of way to Sharon. So there is, if you've walked the property, you know, there is a drainage ditch that comes off of Dryden that runs along the back of the Ott Drive properties and abuts up against the Norton School property.
Yes.
So there is for lack of a better term, a seasonal, ditch that's there. Sometimes there's water in it. Sometimes it's dry as a bone. And it goes along the eastern side and then takes a bend and goes along the back of the Sharon Drive properties into the wetlands that you see, the circle that's up in the upper left. So how can you get the right of way across that ditch area to Sharon for right of way?
I mean, you would have to pipe part of that. As part of the construction, they would have to kind of build out that access.
Through.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Yes. Oh, yes, Miss Allen, I can't see it. Miss Harrigan. I can't see.
And can you use the mic, please?
Thank you. Thanks for this presentation, and my question should be a pretty quick one. Both of these, I mean, it's wonderful to see better traffic patterns for any of our schools and all of our schools for that matter. But do we know what this potential right-of-way to Sharon Drive, can anyone tell me, like, because these traffic patterns really depend on having that access. So potential right-of-way, is it pretty much a given, or?
Well, it's potential. And I think all these schemes will work if permanently that is not available for the buses, because the bus drop, I think it works better on the other scheme based on the traffic flow. Because on this scheme, the buses, everyone enters off of 42 and the buses would go up. And then rather than loop out and go up to Sharon Drive, you would just loop them around the play area and then reconnect over to the two-way traffic, the main artery that goes back out to 42. And we had other schemes that there was always the option to loop back around. And
Yeah.
so, I think we've just started to explore, the reality of that.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, how long does it take to find out whether that is something that's going to work out for us or not? Does anyone know? It's
I
not
don't
necessarily
know
for
the
you
answer
to know. Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. Can you throw up the aerial? So, as a potential, the existing footprint of the school as it stands now, and then right above that is a playground area.
Yes.
In the top left corner of that playground area, at least 100 years ago, there used to be a sidewalk that went from the back of that playground area out to Farmington. Is that a potential out to the left, to the west? Would that be a potential exit instead of going to Sharon? Is that a potential exit or additional exit to go out to Farmington?
It could be. And really, this is kind of the next steps involve discussions, I think, with the town staff, also doing further site due diligence on like soils and whatnot.
Yeah.
It did come up that, because we did look at the sanitary line, and right now it's pumped out to 42. And ideally, it's not pumped because that's a maintenance item. And so there was the talk of that little passageway that goes out, or that trail, and whether or not that could be utilized for sanitary to make the
To
connection.
go out to Farmington to
Right.
hook
And
there.
so I think, you know, as
Okay.
those things are reviewed and looked at, there is potential to take that approach as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Other questions or comments?
I think you have some questions up front.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Tony. I was going to ask, I think you addressed this, but right now, there's a sewer line that goes from existing Norton site out to the road to the entrance. By moving the new Norton further back, does that pose any challenge by running a longer sewer line? I think the initial concern was that the grading was lower at that area, so you'd have to push sewage up. to
Yeah,
go the
it's
same way.
it's already pumped from the back area going to 42. So obviously going further back, that just makes the condition worse.
But you also stated that as you work, if this were to be done, as that area is worked by just degrading and taking trees down, that the elevation would level off a little bit? Would that help? Would that help or not?
I think we really have to figure out what the inverts are. We don't know all those. I think depending on where that's pumped from, because the lower level of that new addition in the back is about 155, I believe, which is a few feet lower than where we're thinking the new building's going to be.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
What is the water source? What is the water source? Is it artesian well, public water? What are we gonna? And how is it going to be affected if we push it back?
Honestly, I think in our due diligence, we didn't focus too much on the water, but if it comes off of, it's easy enough to, it's city water. We would just have to continue it back to the new building.
It's city water. I mean, it's public water. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a pipe.
Mr. Barry.
I know this. Oh, somebody else had their hand up? Okay.
Go ahead, you go first.
Well, it's a crazy question. So, but it goes along with Mr. Perugini talked about one of the logistical pluses for the new middle school would be having Dodd as swing space. Don't anybody throw anything at me. Could this school, before it gets knocked down, be swing space for a year for the old Norton, for if Doolittle or Highland were to be remodeled? And I guess we can't really get an answer right now.
I think if you build the new school and you have the two facilities on the site trying to coexist, there's things to finalize the new school that the old school needs to get out of the way. So I think that would be, while not impossible, it would be difficult.
Okay. Just had that thought. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you would really be driving a temporary situation, would really drive the design, which might leave you with a less desirable end result.
Mr. Grippo, dive right in. I can't see anybody.
Wherever you are, go ahead. Thank you. Like with Mr. Talbot, we both live in the same area of town. I also went to Norton School, and I can envision a 3-mile radius of this neighborhood in my head at a moment's notice. And so the thought of the right-of-way going to Sharon and rerouting all of that bus traffic, for years it's been going down Route 42, that the construction of that road, I'm assuming, is of a much greater strength than of what maybe Sharon Drive is. And so I'm just wondering if the I'm assuming that the traffic flow for the buses would be down Ott and then to Sharon and then into the back of the school, or I'm sure Public Works or someone's going to have a say on what the additional bus traffic would do to the quality of those roads over time. So I don't know, that was just a concern. I'm sure none of you have done a traffic study because that's, way down well, not that far down the road, but, it's definitely a concern as to, now you're bringing of that, flow of bus traffic in through neighborhoods that weren't currently not used to that sort of thing. And secondly, the tree buffer you said was about 100 feet.
Yeah,
in the final construction.
yeah, it varies. So, on that north edge, along Shannon, that's between 80 to 100 feet.
Okay.
On the east edge, those folks have very deep wooded yards, so I think it's probably less important there, but we tried to maintain as much buffer as we could.
Right, and so it's the best you could tell that it did look like the backs of most of the property that abuts up against the school property was deeply wooded, and that's actual, just people don't use that for whatever, if it's swampy or whatever.
It's swampy to the right, where the word wetlands buffer is.
Right.
That's all wooded there, and it is, we noticed it was fairly wet and it's very dense. When we were walking along the property line, I could not see any of those houses. Granted, it is summer, not winter, but.
Along the property line. Oh, so when you mean the yellow line there?
I was along the yellow line.
And
yeah.
okay.
And
So
I couldn't see the house.
So 100 feet on the back side of the school plus whatever. So the lot lines, let's say on Ott Drive there, how long are those? Are those well over 100 feet? Is that like more than a half an acre per lot there? Or is
I don't know the
Yes, it
acreage of
is.
those, but that's
It
a
is.
good,
Yep.
Okay.
well over 200 feet.
All right. So then, okay.
In those houses on Otter right up on the road, and you've got over an acre. One of those houses was the house that I grew up in starting in 4th grade. So yeah,
Okay. So, all right. Great. Thank you.
What, to your point though, Mr. Grippo, the houses on Sharon will have a significantly less buffer than the houses on Ott. My guess is that even in fall, or let's say winter, that it would be very difficult for the Ott Drive houses to see the school that was back there. Sharon Drive, it's going to be very visible. You're gonna look right into that back area of the school from Sharon.
Right. So the thought would be maybe, okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Veliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd some questions about that Sharon access too, but obviously that'll have to be figured out and you'll play that into. My question is, this goes to sort of the long-term, the school question had been raised, which was, okay, so let's say these numbers, going out, we build the school, but 10 years from now, we're actually butting up against the capacity of this new school. And one of the questions I think had been raised at a previous meeting was, where, if we fit this, where on either of these plans is there room to add what I'll call like a stub? If we need an extra, 3-4 classrooms to accommodate another, 50, 60 or 100 new students in this school, where is there room to, is this plan contemplating an easy, let's just tack on, we're someplace where we can just tack on extra space?
Yeah, these aren't obviously final designs, they were test fits, but honestly, this building or this idea is very similar to another school that we did. And at the end of the 2-story classroom wing, you have the option to continue directly east, or you can actually start to turn the corner and start to go north. You would obviously lose a little bit of your play area, but you do have a lot of room back there to continue to add on classrooms onto those corridors.
Would that be true on the courtyard?
It would. The 2-story classroom wing, really, again, at the end of that bar at the bottom, that's the classroom wing. You can continue to go east into the play area, taking up open land that you have out there with additional classrooms.
Right. And just when you're building a school like this, is the new gymnasium, are we talking, I know, for example, schools like Chapman, the gym is very small. And I must say, I don't know as much as Mr. Grippo or Mr. Talbot about the history of Norton School here, but I don't know, is this, when you build the school, is the gymnasium going to be bigger, cafeteria is going to be bigger, everything going to be more accommodating for
I can tell you from experience that the state is going to have a strong opinion on the amount of square footage that you allocate to these.
Okay.
Because you're going to be battling with them to hit a perceived percentage of the allowable square footage that you're allowed to have within your building based on the enrollment. And I will be honest, some of the schools that we did, they really weren't supposed to have a gym. They were supposed to have a PE space that was 2,500 square feet. Now, we did a gym of approximately 5,400 square feet, which allows for a youth basketball court with about 5-6 feet around it on all ends. If you want to get into a gym that's probably adequately sized for adult recreational use, you're looking at about 6,800 square feet. And so that extra, in that case, that extra 4,000 square feet, you either need to get the state to kind of agree to that, or that square footage comes from somewhere else, because you're always up against the wall with your total square footage that they're targeting. But the schools that we do now, typically elementary schools, we end up with a, in the range of 5,000 to 6,000 square foot gym. So you can have a basketball court in that.
Okay. I was just curious how that plays out in these new schools.
And
under
things
the new system.
change at the state, but that's kind of the current reality with OSCGR.
Gotcha. And then the last question I have is, are there, this is what, 200 parking spaces total?
Yeah, approximately.
Is that significantly more than are there now, or is it?
I believe we said there were 150 to 160, which, obviously the school's bigger.
Yep.
So I think proportionally we're at a similar ratio. And I do think that there's opportunity for more, or at least for overflow parking areas, depending on what the actual need is going to be as we really get into this further.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Valiber. Are there other questions or comments? No, nobody over there?
Nobody else there.
Thank you. I guess we can raise the screen, please. Wow. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the presentation and the time spent on the test fit.
Thank you.
And thank you to my colleagues for all of your excellent questions. But I want to remind everybody that this test fit was really done just to kind of determine whether a school of the size that we would need to build under this proposed plan fits on the site. And I think we've determined it does that. How exactly we do it, whether we use that access road or not, and whether we, change the configuration of the bus and traffic routes and the configuration of the building, all of that, we've got a long way to go. So I don't want the public to think that this was a well thought out, designed building and traffic pattern, and it's the final product. It is far from that. This is only to determine whether there's a viable option here for us to build a new school, which it sounds like it is. How exactly that gets done, we got a lot more work to do if we choose to go down this path of this plan. So thank you for that test fit. And the council has allocated money, as you know, to continue doing more work if we need to, as we go forward for additional work. And certainly if we choose to build a school on the Norton site, we've got a lot more design work to be done to make sure it works really well. We're clearly going to be concerned about protecting the abutting neighbors. We are worried about traffic. Mr. Grippo, you raised that. That's the first thing I think we all thought about was that access road back to Sharon Drive. The last thing we want to do is detrimentally impact the viability of people's homes and the usability of their homes. So we've got a long way to go, but the good news is it looks like it works there if we want to choose that option. So thank you for that. With that, I would love to move on to kind of the financial conversation. The last meeting I talked, we did roll out the beginning of a 10-year timeline budget, if you will, which basically shows the financial impacts to the community based on a whole slew of assumptions. One obviously being the phase one that we're currently talking about, which is the two elementary school option. Those costs have been added into this plan. And there are a variety of things that we put in here based on what our knowledge is as to what else is happening in the community financially. It's my understanding they've been revised a bit to answer some of the questions that we had last meeting as well, based on the new budget that we just adopted tonight, Mr. Jaskat, is that correct? So I know it's kind of a very detailed sheet. We're happy to go through it for those that are seeing it for the first time. I think there's extra copies for members of the public who might want to see them. And certainly, please, from the Board of Ed perspective, whatever questions you have, please, jump right in and we'll try to answer them as best we can. So, Sean and Jim?
Sure. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
A little louder, please.
Better? Okay. So, basically, I just updated what we displayed last time for scenarios 6 and updated it for all the reductions that took place in the last few weeks of the capital expenditure budget. So I know the Board of Education then went through and called out all the Chapman, Humiston, Norton, and Dodge, no, Darcy, I think it was, yeah. Schools, so those were all taken out of the Board of Ed side of the capital expenditure plan. And then also on the town side, Sean was instructed to make some reductions in years 2 through 5 of the plan. So this basically trues it up to what we just adopted tonight a little while ago. Most of the columns stay the same. So I can, maybe just for comparison purposes, it's the third column, the projected new CEP debt that you can see if you compare what's on the front page, which is the update, to what we had previously. You could see what the projected debt is for the capital expenditure plan. The debt for the scenario 6, which is the column with the 4 above it, that would stay exactly the same. At the end of the day, I think the focus was on the mill rate and what impact that had on the mill rate. So that's going all the way over to the right, where it says increase in mills over fiscal year 22 for all general fund debt service. If you compare that to what was on the previous sheet, you should see a significant reduction. We were looking at mill rate increases in excess of 3. So now those have all dropped down to probably closer to mid 2s. Keep in mind, this is just phase 1, looking out over 10 years.
So Jim, thank you. If I can just jump in, just to kind of go quickly through for those that haven't seen this before. Obviously, item 1 is our existing bonded debt, which takes you out 10 years based on what's already bonded.
Correct.
That's column 1.
That's locked in. Yep.
Right. Then column 2 is any unissued debt that we know is going to be coming down the pike over those.
From previous capital expenditure plans that we had not yet bonded.
Correct.
Yes.
So those are certainties.
Yep.
And then obviously column 3 is the projected capital expenditure debt service based on what we just approved tonight.
Right.
And if you compare the two column threes from sheet one and sheet two, that'll show you the savings that we incurred based on the reductions that we made through the capital budget
Right.
process.
Just over the 10 years. And keep in mind, this is just 10 years.
Correct.
As opposed to perhaps, 30 years by the time you're paying off all the debt on all the projects.
So you'll
there's
see it went from
significant
almost
reduction.
$44 million down to, just over $35 million.
Right.
So again, part of what we talked about last meeting was let's really try to skinny up some of the areas that we felt like we could without impacting the community. So we make a little more room for school modernization. So we did that, and I think we're all very comfortable with that. Obviously, column 4 is the impacts of scenario 6, phase 1 only, in terms of debt service, correct?
Correct.
Yep.
And that wouldn't change from what we talked about last
Right,
time. That's
right.
exact same thing.
So those numbers have stayed the same, but you can see, the annual debt service associated with that plan, does get expensive. It's, over $6 million as you start rolling down the line. But then again, the next column out is some of the operational savings that we discussed, particularly with Mr. Massiana. I know he worked a lot on some of the savings, the operational savings that we would incur that we could use to offset against the increased debt service. So you'll see that the increased debt service, for instance, in year 2025 is, what's that, 5 million too? I can't really read my lines here. Actually, 2,000,007. Well, we'll go down one more. We'll go to 2026 is 5.2 million in debt service for the scenario 1, and then you've got $459,000 in savings, which helps offset some of that increase in debt service.
And there's other, offsets too, including the use of various reserve funds. And again, I think I mentioned last time as on the conservative side as far as spreading that out in subsequent years.
So again, just so you understand our thinking on this, these are reserve funds that, generally are kind of one-time funds, correct, Jim?
Yes.
So what we wanted to make sure is that we didn't plop them all into one year, because then you create a bigger problem for you in the next year. So we're trying to use this to kind of smooth things out and use it very judiciously. So we kind of felt this was the right way to use those proceeds.
Yeah, so after the use of the various reserve funds, that's our net general fund debt service, and net of any operational savings. So that's all inclusive projected debt service.
Yeah. And that's including the reserve funds.
Right. Again, a lot of assumptions here about interest rates. I'm starting with very modest, I think 2.5% and working up through 3.5%. Obviously, we've been in a very low interest rate environment. This last year, we issued bonds 14 million at under 2%. So the hope is that those rates will stay down in the near term. And I make assumptions too. We only work with a 5-year capital expenditure plan, but I do assume that we're going to be continuing to approve projects based on that same level that we do in the 5-year plan, going out 10 years.
And again, to just talk about what I think Mr. Grippo raised is making sure we maintain our AAA rated credit. That's something that really is important here. If we were, unfortunately, if we did lose that, we're not sure what our borrowing base interest rate would be. I think what we're using in 2.5% and then eventually 3.5% is prudent, given the low rate environment we're in. If we were, unfortunately, because of all the debt we're going to be taking on, this is really going to become a balancing act for us to make sure that we can get the rating agencies to keep us at a AAA status so we can borrow as cheaply as possible. So, that's something that we're trying to manage. And I know we've talked about it, and there's no real easy answer to that, because it's not crystal clear what you need to do to maintain that AAA rating. We're going to do the best we can to walk that line, and we're certainly going to be in constant contact with our consultants to make sure that when we're making these assumptions that, we're trying to do it all with that in mind. So, It's not an easy task, folks, but these are the assumptions we're making. And we want the public to understand what these assumptions are because it's important for them to know that when they do go in and vote. Sorry, Jim.
Oh, you're good. And the next two columns just show the year-over-year increase in the debt service. 33.72 is our current mill rate. So as far as the impact of the projected debt service, you can see with this updated version that the mill rate would increase from 33.72 and kind of peak out at 36.5 based on the assumptions that I've used. The column to the right of that shows the mills for all general fund debt service increase over what our current debt service is. So we're looking at, we're starting with actually a 2.76 mills for our current debt service, and that will increase to 5.54, which is a 2.78 increase over the mills associated with our current debt service. Just to give you some idea of how this is set up and works. But, and again, if you look back and compare it to what it was based on the previous capital expenditure plan, you could see that it did decrease quite a bit because it was up in the mid-3 range previously.
Just, Mr. Chairman, quick
Yes,
question.
Mr. Barry.
Thank you. That mill rate, the increase is taking into account debt service. It's not taking into account the operating budgets.
No,
and any
and
increase
I
in
know we
that.
talked about that. There's a couple of things here too, I suppose, in addition to all the other operating budget, Board of Ed, town increases, and then, assumptions about grand list growth and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Although we tried to build that into this worksheet a little bit too, so we could play with the numbers to, right. I think right now we were assuming a 1.5%
Increase in growth
increase in-
assumption, and that was going to cover the majority of what our operating expenses are year to year. But that reality is not going to cover it all. But this mill rate projection is just to cover debt service.
just to
increases.
cover debt service. So I probably should build in a factor and,
Well, and
to
that's going to
accommodate for
be
that
a
other
wild
increase.
number of disparity when we each come up with what we think might be right. But we do have to come up with some number because expenses are going up every year. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky enough to keep the mill rate increase at half a mil, we're probably doing pretty good going forward. I mean, we've tried to be better than that during the height of COVID, but you could be anywhere between a half and 3/4 or even a point just on the operating budget, pretty much. So, that's a factor that's not in here as well. So that's a good point, Mr. Bowery. And again, we're trying to be, cautious on grand list growth. We as a community have been working really hard on growing our grand list with quality development. Maybe we'll outpace this, but I know Jim gets pretty nervous I think we pushed him to 1.5% and he was starting to sweat.
Yeah.
So if we push him much beyond that, he might have a bigger problem. Right, Jim?
You're right.
Rob, I had a quick question.
Yeah, of course, Tony. Yeah.
Thank you. So scenario 6, phase 1, where it lists the average taxpayer impact over. Getting off at 416, do those payments in the last 10 years get a little lower? Do we know how much, what the drop is from year 10 to year 20? Because what I'm concerned about is folks that are not privy to this and live and say, "Oh my God, I'm paying 400 in perpetuity," but that isn't necessarily the case. It'd be nice to show that clearly.
If you're phasing in new construction at schools, that could change it too.
Well, we're only saying phase one.
That's what I mean.
So, yeah, I was gonna ask.
So if you go that exercise, that could be confusing.
Phase two and phase three look like? So let's get through this.
We haven't even gotten there yet.
Don't ask.
So Jim, I don't, we've
Yeah.
only run it 10 years, but Jim can certainly answer that.
Yeah, and I could probably come up with something, realistic, based on the cash flows for, 20 years, just for that scenario, just to give you some perspective. Sure.
But this gets back to, we're talking about the average taxpayer, which is, the average house and two cars of 231,104. I had heard a lot of people, and again, I'm not trying to pick on anything, but the fact of the matter is I've heard, well, would you support a new school if it costs you $200 a year? But the only $200 that I see is before all of our bonding is phased in. And so it's actually a higher number than that. And whatever it is, if it's only $400 or $500, if somebody thinks that's a small amount, then so be it. But my point is, I think it's important for the public to have all of the accurate information. Getting to Tony's point, to have the next 10 years might be helpful to them as well.
Sure.
Yes, Ms. Ham.
I'm just curious, has anyone gone to the business community and talked about the impact of this on them?
Well, interestingly, you bring that up. We haven't spoken to them about it, but it's been a conversation that we're very concerned about. And as you get further down the line, the last lines, we did make some assumptions as to what the impacts of these items could be on some of our larger taxpayers. So that's where we're going to get, and I think Jim will get to that in a second, but you can see it towards the end of these columns. But I can tell you, for our largest taxpayers, it's significant.
Yeah, no, maybe if I jump in at this point, the last couple of columns show the increases for just the scenario 6, and then for all of debt, for the average assessment of our top 10 taxpayers. So that was approximately 21 million. Assessment. So you can see the dollar amount associated with that.
So Faith, does that answer your question a little bit? So you can see if that's an assessed value of 21 million, right, Jim?
Yeah.
So at an assessed value of $21 million, you can see what the increases in taxes are to that taxpayer. Now, we have some very large taxpayers that are well beyond $21 million. But, this is just put in there because it is something we're concerned about. Clearly, we want to understand what the impacts are to the smallest taxpayers, the average taxpayer, and certainly our largest taxpayers, because we can ill afford to lose any of them. And our largest taxpayers, God forbid we do lose one or two of them, that could be really catastrophic for us. So we're really trying to make sure we understand what the impacts are to everybody.
Right. So the third and fourth columns from the right represent the amounts for the average taxpayer, whereas the last two columns give you some sense of what it might impact on a large business, or one of our, again, based on the average of our top 10.
Rob, can I ask Jim a quick question?
Yes, Mr. Veliver.
And so, Jim, just to clarify that, when you're contemplating scenario 6 average taxpayer, you're contemplating that their house and their two cars have a total assessed value of 231,104.
Correct.
Right. So that contemplates someone probably has a that's not contemplating someone who has a $500,000 house. That's probably
correct.
something more in the 300 range.
Absolutely.
House, depending on what? 330.
It's about 330, including the two cars.
Gotcha. Okay.
330 would be the gross value
Right.
of the cars.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. So I just want when people just factor that into, and if you have a house that's more like a $500,000 or $600,000 house, you're really looking almost double that number.
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Slocum, I'm sorry. Yeah, Mr. Slocum.
Yeah, this was just a quick question. I think I mentioned it the last time, and I know sometimes median is interesting on.
Yeah,
on
we
this.
did take,
Is that a possibility to see that? Because then.
I did check.
half above, half below.
I know that it's lower than the median was actually lower than the average.
Yeah, I was not suggesting that we don't show both, but I think you got half above and half below with the median, and that might be useful to see.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Grippo.
Not to trivialize the numbers at the end here for our business folks. I was just wondering, do they have the same tax deductibility caps that individuals do? Like, where like for our property tax is $10,000, right? Is it the same? It's not the same for property owner, right? It's completely different when they're deducting from taxes and that kind of thing.
From a business
Yeah,
tax
from a
return
business- yeah,
perspective,
yeah, it's
I'm not
completely
going to play
different.
accountant, but I understand that they're going to deduct whatever the taxes are.
Right. Okay. I was just making sure. Thanks.
Anybody disagree with that?
You're right. You're correct.
I think that's what she did.
That impacts profit too. Just because it's expensive.
Just getting back to the median, to just give you some idea, just based on the real estate, the average real estate based on our most recent grand list was 212,500. The median would be 197,990. So it's a little bit less, but not too far out.
Not that different. Yeah, it is good to know. Yeah.
About.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sean?
I would just add one thing the council brought up following our last meeting was the percent of the grand list that is office space commercial, given some of the difficulties in that market. So we did get a number off our last grand list, just thought I'd give you now. It's 3.64% of our total grand list is office space in the commercial industrial overall category. So office space is 3.64%.
That's good. It's less than I thought, so that's good.
Yeah, it was less than we thought too. It's
Yeah,
actually
good.
100 parcels that fall into that.
That's where we're
category.
going to get hit. So
Yeah, that's what they said that that would be their biggest hit would be an office space
Yeah.
for the next.
Unless things dramatically change between now and the next grand list, but yeah, that's where it's shaping up for 2 years.
Because I mean, we will all have an assessment in 2 years too, so that could change things as well. So these numbers are good for now, but in 2 years, some of the houses might go up, some of them, well, I think they'll all go up, but some might go up a lot, some
Right.
might go up a little. So I mean, it's very eye-opening to look at these numbers as we see them here.
Well, and we did talk about the reval that's happening. I mean, some of us are less worried about it than others. I'm one that's worried about it. Others are not as worried about it, but I think it's certainly something we ought to be cautious and think about during this process. Yes, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, just real quick, is the medical included in office space, included in that 3.64?
Just reading through the email. I don't think it is.
Okay.
No, but I'll confirm. It's not that
All right.
specific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Other questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Grippo.
I just had an incredibly negative question to ask.
No, right?
I know. If we encountered a 2008 style downturn, or I guess I'll ask it this way, how much revenue did we lose when we encountered a 2008 style downturn? Because my concern was we're taking on this much debt and we ran into something like that again, that would devastate us, I would think, but maybe not. I don't know.
I think the biggest effort, the biggest
incredibly
impact is
debt,
on pension. pension analysis.
Yep. But that affects people's cash. It affects their income. It doesn't affect the value of the properties. And even reval doesn't, in one sense, it's revenue neutral. If we collect $100 million before the reval, we're going to collect $100 million next time. It's a matter of what happens to the mill rate to still collect that same amount. So it's revenue neutral. It's just that a portion, like residences, may pay more of it to make up for the fact that office space may go down. That's why I'm heartened to hear that it was only 3.5% was office space. We thought it was more than that, because I'm convinced, and I think we were talking about that part's going to go down.
So it's more about the taxpayers' ability to pay taxes than it is for us to make our loan payments.
But there is
But
another
it's the-
piece of it. There's another piece of
Yeah.
it that did have an impact on our operating budget and had to do with pensions.
Yeah.
Right.
Funding our pension
Yes. Right.
plan. Because we had a crushing blow to that.
Right. And that would
It
happen
added
again.
almost $500,000 to our fund, and we
Right.
smoothed it over what, 10?
Or it might even be worse.
It had quite an impact.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Like I said, it was a very negative question,
Well,
but
no,
I
it's
wanted
fair.
to ask it,
Well, it's a very valid question at a point where if people have less money in their pocket, then it just causes a greater burden to have taxes wherever they're going to be heading. So clearly, we want to make sure the town stays affordable for everybody through any term. But we have a wonderful new economic development director that's going to bring huge amounts of grand list growth. So we don't have to worry about any of this stuff. Sorry, Andrew. A lot of pressure on you, buddy. I got it. You guys heard that. I got it. So this is kind of our cash flow we're developing. We're certainly very much open to input and thoughts, additions, subtractions from members of the Board of Ed or anyone else that they think. Obviously, I want to give the public, there's a few people here I think probably want to speak. I want to give them an opportunity. But, this is a collaborative issue here, trying to develop this cash flow. We're trying to make sure that we can make a decision based on as good information as we can. It's not going to be perfect. We're making assumptions, but it's important that the taxpayers know that we've really worked hard to give them good information. And that's what we're trying to do. So any additional input from anybody is certainly very welcome. Anybody, members of the council? Yeah, with this point, let's open it up. I just got some public here that certainly may want to speak on anything that we've talked about tonight. So feel free to come up. Just give us your name and address for the record, and thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello? All right. My name is Chuck Neth. I live at 1355 Notch Road. Yes, I will hold it because it's a lot more comfortable. So, yeah, first it's been quite a roller coaster of a meeting for me. I was encouraged at first to kind of see the town council, the Board of Ed, coming together and talking about what we did as the SMC. I think that's the right step. But then we kind of divulge into the deja vu all over again and everything we kind of been talking about at the SMC for the last 2 years, where we're going back and forth between an option and another option. And it was my understanding that the SMC was a collaborative effort that the town council and the board put together to come up with a plan. And we included 7 members of the public, down to 6 at the end. And I think we did our job. We delivered a plan to you guys. So to be talking about one option versus another, that's it kind of hits what we did a little bit as a committee. We gave you what we think is the option. And I'm not afraid to call it the preferred option because 3 times as many people favored the option as anything else. So I think if we could focus on the option that we put forth, I think it would be better for the town as a whole and more productive. And I hear, we need to get more community input. The community hasn't had a chance to speak. We said that for 2 years. We sought input every meeting. We had public comment and we had very little. Um, you know, Faith said it, you know, we haven't heard from anybody, except for a very small few that want this 4 through 6 or 6 through 8 middle school. But the committee wasn't put together for come up with the best 6 through 8 middle school plan or come up with the cheapest plan. We came up with the best plan for the town. And I think that's what we delivered to everybody. So I don't see how anything's really changed from that. And I would hope that, you know, going forward, I think it's best for everybody if we can just get behind that one plan that we do have. It is the preferred option, 3 times as many people, 9-3 on the committee that everybody here agreed was going to put this together. And there was representation from the town council and the Board of Ed. So that's kind of where I stand on the option. I think it is the option. And I don't think there would be as much dissent and miscommunication and misinformation out there if everybody kind of got behind it. So I was there in the middle of the meeting, and then I'm encouraged to see the plan for the Norton site. I thought was very good, as far as validating kind of what we had as an option. So I'm glad to see that. And then, you know, we're talking about finances at the end, I think is a good step as well. So, again, a little bit of a roller coaster, a little bit of deja vu, but I hope at the end we're kind of moving forward with the option that the SMC kind of put forth, and we can make some progress for everybody. That's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Ness.
Rob Mercado, 1146 Wolfville Road. I just wanted to thank the SMC. You guys did a great job. You came up with that plan. I back you. I want to thank Rob Orris and the council. Most of you see that there is a preferred plan. That's what they came up with. I want to thank Rob for backing the SMC and saying that's what the charter was. They did their charter. Now let's move on that. So please, Solon, you guys said you don't see a big deal with the education would get any better or worse going to 6th, 7th, and 8th middle school. I like that. Let's stay with what we do in Cheshire. It works. We have a great education here. Let's not do anything that could damage that. On a second note, on reevaluating houses, is that something that can be put away for a few years? Does it have to? It has to be done? And is that state or whatnot? Is there a way that we can reduce?
Statutory requirement.
Is there a way that we can reduce mill rate to offset that?
When you say reduce the mill rate to offset it.
Whatever that, if we know property is going up 2%, can you reduce that mill rate 2% to offset it so we don't increase?
Well, we've got to have enough money to pay the bills. And so,
No, but if we're going along, right, and we have this plan without having the reset or our property value is readjusted and it works. If that is going to throw it and make extra money that we don't need, is there a way that it can be reduced to keep it where this plan is as if there wasn't a readjustment?
yeah, yes, that can happen.
And would we do that?
We always do it.
Oh, okay. Good.
Every 4 years, 5 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other members of the public? Yes, Mr. Talbot.
And I just want to clarify. So in other words, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier, if you're bringing in $100 million in taxes and the mill rate is 30 and the reval causes that to go up, what you do is you automatically lower your mill rate to get back to that exact same number.
But
I just
that-
wanted to.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But what I'm concerned about is that we have a percentage change where
Yes.
there's a bigger burden put on the backs of the residents, and therefore that's where the issue is. So there may not be a total amount of money to give back, and we see a larger burden on the backs of the residents. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yep.
And I think there's a possibility of that happening because we see some of the commercial properties going down in value. Now, thankfully, we heard that office is a small component. That is the biggest piece that we're worried about, where we're seeing those properties reduce in value. But, that is a concern that the total amount stays the same, but the percentages on the residents go higher, and therefore it's a larger burden on them. And that's a concern. So, thank you, Mr. Talbot, for clarifying that. Yes, Mr. Bowman.
Matt Bowman, 422 Maple Avenue. I had asked a question at the last meeting of Chuck Warrington, and he had said that he had 3 bids coming in within a couple of weeks, and he could speak to the increase in the budget numbers that they had projected for our project. And I ask him now how those bids came in and where their increases.
Yeah, so we did have a couple of recent school projects come in. One of them was New Fairfield High School. That budget is, I'll say, or in the 80 million plus or minus range. We're currently negotiating that. We came in about $1 million over on that. It's not significant. It's not like 5 or 6 million. That is really due to budget management and the project, and keeping abreast of the trends that are coming and the pricing. One of the challenges right now is, I think everybody can see, is material costs are volatile. Some are up, some are down. Materials availability is very, very difficult. We have roofing projects right now that for a flat roof, there's insulation. If anybody's familiar with it, it's thick insulation to give you an R value on your roof. And the suppliers are not even quoting prices until they ship. And the shipment's out 5 to 6 months. So we're in a predicament where contractors are having a tough time holding their bids, frankly. And so it's either we pull the bid and wait till this volatility calms down. We're hoping, I think some of the projections are hopefully first, second quarter next year. We'll have to wait and see. Or you partner with, as an owner, partner with that contractor and kind of go, we're recommend somewhat of an open book policy of show us your bid, show us what you carried. If we need to get the project done, show us up front. And when that cost comes in, we're going to pay for the difference and maybe 10% upcharge, as long as we feel it's fair in an open book policy. But there's different strategies. So I think it's more volatility and a lot of unknown and material availability and long lead items. A lot of projects right now, we're concerned about being able to close in roofs. Open span steel joists are long lead items right now. We can't even get a time frame on them, and they're affecting projects that we're going to be bid in potentially in the later this year. So that and combined with some of the pricing is going up. We're seeing some steel going up, obviously, in the raw materials, and they're an uptick. So, with respect to these budgets, we, in the numbers, we took what we call the probable cost. We did a high, low probable, and that probable is basically, the average of the two. But as we get closer to, whatever scenario and project you select, we're going to have to fine tune these and adjust these and look at what the escalation rates we think are going to be. Hopefully by the time we get there, we're hopefully settling out, and we'll reach out to our construction industry partners, our professional estimators, construction managers who are really in this every day and seeing lots of bids. Also talking with the state, because they are seeing a lot of bids. There's 169 towns throughout the state, and see what they're seeing for trends as well and make those adjustments. So I think there will be some adjustments to that probable cost. I think it's prudent to be aware of it, but not make quick reactions to it at this point. I don't think they're going to be, my gut says I don't think it's to be significant dollars on the projects, but there'll probably be an uptick. So,
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone on the SMC committee for working so hard and doing their due diligence for 18 months and coming up with a plan and forwarding that plan to the town council for consideration. It wouldn't have been my scenario I would have preferred a new high school for many reasons. Not the least of which is if you built a new high school in the north end, it would certainly bring future development, which would increase our tax base and could make the building of a new high school more viable. It certainly would have given some people at the Board of Education the ability to make the high school a 6 through 8 middle school, along with bringing an alternate high school into it, and along with bringing the administration offices into that building, thereby closing Chapman, moving Chapman over to Dodd, by moving or closing Humiston and closing Darcy. But it's, my plan, was considered and was actually shot down for the same reason that the middle school was shot down, in that it wasn't viable and they didn't feel that there was a need for a new high school. And they felt the need was projections of increase in student population in the elementary schools. Therefore, that's what we considered and that's what we forwarded. But the nice thing about the new elementary schools is you don't have to build them both at once. And if you take and close Chapman and build a 600 student elementary school, increasing your capacity by 250 students, and you find that the projections that we have done, or the projections that were done for us, I should say, were wrong, you don't have to build that second elementary school. The other thing is that your oldest buildings are your elementary schools. Dodd, I believe, was built in 58, 59. And we're talking about replacing schools, your two oldest schools, Chapman and Norton. That's the smart thing to do. If you build another middle school, you're adding another building to be maintained because you still need the current Dodd. You're still going to have to build an elementary school to replace Chapman, which, as far as ADA compliance goes, is an embarrassment to the town of Cheshire, a complete embarrassment. My son went there. He was handicapped, and he had to endure sometimes the unendurable in getting his education there. He succeeded, and he went on to Dodd and Cheshire High School, and he is is doing well. But that school is a complete embarrassment. Our administrative offices are an embarrassment. Something has to be done. Something has to be done sooner than later. Let's stop fooling around with the 6, 7, 8 middle school concept. We can do that in the future. You need to remodel your oldest schools first. Another thing, I look out into the audience tonight, and this is such an important issue for everyone. There's no one here. There's no one to come forward and to speak. Why? If there's so many people that are coming to speak and so many people that are concerned, they're not here. So I don't know, people say I talk to people. I talk to people too. And it's 50-50. Half of them want a middle school, half of them want the elementary schools, and there are some that still want a high school. But I can tell you this. The difference between 2019, like someone asked, and 2021, well, 2019, the Republicans had a minority representation of 2. Obviously, in 2019 at the elections, people didn't like what they saw and didn't like what they heard from the majority Democrats, and they voted them out. And now we have a minority Democratic representation on the Board of Ed that is trying to postpone this and put it off, and it's an embarrassment. Get it done. Stop fooling around. You lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Other members of the public? Okay, seeing none. Is there anything else that anyone would like to talk about from the council? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I just want one last thing, because I know we brought up the Humiston. I think moving forward, I think that we need to start putting that into the plan as well. And I'd like to move quicker on that than, than later on it. I think it's an important part of the puzzle here. And I think, obviously it's going to be a cost expense onto the plan, and we need to figure out how much that cost will be. So I'm just asking that if we can start looking into that aspect of closing Humiston and moving the offices and the alternate high school somewhere else, I would like to see that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And I agree with that. It's going to take some collaboration between us and the school and the Board of Ed, because clearly they need to weigh in as to what works for them and, how all of that's going to play out. So, but I agree. Anybody on the council? Members of the Board of Ed? Mr. Slocum, I'm sorry.
Only to support that statement. And I know we did ask it last time. And Chuck, I thought you said there was some money in that budget to accommodate some of those changes. Am I mistaken? I thought you said there was something in the budget, not all of it.
In the current one for the projections?
Not, to my knowledge, not in phase one.
Only in
There was a
phase
small
one.
amount of money that was put into the overall proposal, potentially to put into Humiston, which I can tell you I'm absolutely against.
Well,
Yeah,
that's-
correct. We did
Why we
carry
would
in
ever
the
consider
overall. We
putting any
definitely carried-
significant dollars into
That
Humiston
was the small
is
amount of
beyond
money.
me. But there was some money carried in, as I recall, Mr. Slocum, for
That's how it went.
putting
Yes.
money into Humiston, but it was not in phase one.
I brought
It
it
was
up.
roughly 10 or 12 million in that range, and we
Yeah,
distributed over to cash flow.
I brought that up.
Yeah, they actually were in the cash flow. I think we carried about 2 million over a course of 6 or 7 years for improvements to kind of count for some improvements there.
Okay, which we don't want to do, of course.
Yeah, a couple meetings, like, I think I came up here and said that I didn't see that money, that $10 million total cost accounted for here. But I'm pretty sure it was not to put into the Humiston building. It's what, I think it was a best guesstimate, what we thought we needed to do to move someplace else. But I do agree. I think the board agrees as well,
Right.
Whether things fit in the high school or not, I think, when this goes referendum, that should be included in the plan sooner than later. We know
Well, I
if you got
guess
it,
as a
so.
follow-on to the open question, I guess it would be my request then that we get something on that, because that's important, because I think the majority of us up here have addressed it. Some of the subtractions made in the 5-year capital plan are built upon it. I think it's critical that be done.
Agreed. Anybody else here? Members of the Board of Ed? Staff, Sean, Jim, Dr. Solon, Mr. Massiana? Anything? No? Okay, if there's nothing else, then I'll call for a motion to adjourn. But before we do that, I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I know it's not always easy conversation, but I think that's how we get to the best answer. I do know this, the public is seeing that we're working at something, and we're not always going to agree, but if we can do it respectfully, we can try to move a plan forward. I know we're all motivated for the right reasons, and I'm confident we'll get there if we just keep working at it. So thank you all. With that, now I'll call for a motion. Thank you, Mr. Barry. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. All in favor? Motion passed unanimously that are here. Thank you all. Good night.